Tiptoe is the latest in Russell T Davies' series of, in Alan Cumming's words, State of the Nation shows. Shows that kind of address what is going on in Britain, the world, not just relating to queer rights, but to everything that Russell takes target at. So what is the show? It's, again, in Russell's words, a suburban thriller about the hostility in modern everyday life, radicalization, hostility, and a kind of reckoning of intolerance, all explored through this story that Russell insists was born of constructing these characters first, these David Morrissey and Alan Cumming characters. Who are these characters? Well, the actors might have once been real-life neighbours and have been friends for a long time, but on the show, they're neighbours, but they're certainly not friends. We've got the straight, married man, electrician Clive, and the gay, somewhat newly single and smarting about it, Leo, nearly 60, very close to Russell T Davies' own age, and the mounting reckoning between these two men as their lives intertwine closer and closer. That's the show, pretty much. And Russell has said he wants this not to be lean-back TV, but TV that pokes the audience. Active TV, provocative TV, TV to make people get involved and active. I mean, only a couple of minutes into the first episode, we're naming specific politicians. This is a show to jolt the audience, get the audience talking, and get the audience doing things. So let's talk about these first two episodes, the ones released in the show's first week of release. Lots to talk about. Lots of stuff outside the show with interviews and interesting comments to talk about as well. So doing that, discussing myself, Neo from Australia, along with Ingiga from the UK and Oliver from the UK. What do we all think of these episodes of Tiptoe?
I think it's incredible TV as drama, as something constructed, as something written. I think this is everything I love RTD's writing for. It's equal parts grounded and farcical. It's very, very political, like very obviously, very headlinesy, while also being full of like offbeats and quirks and character decisions that don't seem to make sense on their face unless you think quite deeply about them. It's just off the first two episodes, I'm having a really great time with it. And then there's a little asterisk next to that with some qualifiers that I'm sure we'll come to.
Yeah, for my part, I think as an interpersonal drama, as a thriller, I think it's got lots of really impressive aspects. It's got fantastic lead characters, like really fantastic scenes, some fantastic editing at certain points, which I'm sure we'll come to as well. And I guess RTD's control of what's happening between these characters, the way that like a little slip up, the character can say something they didn't quite think about before it came out of their mouth, and that can kind of set off a mine or like a bomb in a conversation, or a character can kind of tragically, through good intentions, kind of dig their own grave. Stuff like that is like the absolute meat and potatoes of great drama, and I think this is showing he's still very much got what it takes. Like he is not like lost his touch in that regard at all. Like Oliver, I have asterisks as well in terms of specific things RTD is trying to say or how he's saying them, and I would say I feel the show is kind of slightly bifurcated. You've got, for the most part, it's the drama, the thriller aspect, and then occasionally you'll stop and we'll have a bit of a thesis statement from one character or another. And I guess I prefer the former to the latter. I think in general, I think that whenever you've got two characters whose dialogue is flowing back and forth, I think that it really sings.
Oh yeah, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Just two incredibly strong performances and very well written, complicated, flawed in such interesting ways for the lead characters. I love that it's great. There's no frumping around here, and there's no hiding behind anything here. I love that it's such an ostentatiously political show. It's such an ostentatiously like autobiographical in some ways. You can like the great Melba and Leo conversation in episode 1. You can see is Russell doing a reckoning that all sorts of people are having. At this moment in time. I love that it's so of the moment. It feels so now. I just think it's so cool that over his career, from Queer as Folk, Bob and Rose, Cucumber Banana, It's a Sin, Tiptoe, I just love this big gay body of work he's developed. I think it's such an impressive thing to have cultivated and created over this time. And just to keep, I love that State of the Nation phrasing Alan Cumming uses for like, and I guess Years and Years wasn't as quite, in a queer sense, but it was doing the same sort of thing of kind of looking at the world as Russell sees it and kind of explicating his take on it. I just think it's a fantastic, such a timely case of that. And yes, there are bits, quite a few bits where I was shaking my head at the show and at Russell, but on the whole, I'm very happy to be watching this and to be thinking about it. I wish it was stretched out over 5 weeks. I wish these were getting dripped out one by one because there's so much to talk about and to think about, and we're rushing through it so soon. But yeah, I think it's fantastic.
The release schedule is bonkers.
Is that it? Is it only 5 episodes? I haven't quite kept up. Okay.
Yeah.
It's so interesting, like the Manchester stuff as well, to be just to, I've never been there, but to see this place through Russell's eyes in all these different eras, it just feels like such a, I feel like I'm witnessing something really literary developing over his career. And I think it's so cool to see this being done in different ways. And but like he says, I was watching the BFI interview with him today, and someone asks him like what comes first in story, idea or theme or character. And he always says it's character, 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 character. Everything comes from character for him. And Leo and Clive are real people. Like this sounds like I'm dissing writers in a way. They don't even feel constructed to me. They just feel absolutely humanistic and like fully 3-dimensional flawed people. Just that David Morrissey's performance knocked me out the most of all the actors in the episodes. I think it's such an interesting, complicated thing he's doing there. But Leo is just I love him, and he's doing so much wrong, and there's so much I just want to scream and like shake him by the shoulders and say, what are you doing? But I completely understand everything that he's doing. I just think it's he's, for all his faults, and if we were talking about Doctor Who and all his other stuff, we could go on about his faults forever. For all his faults, he's just an amazing character writer, Russell, isn't he?
Yeah, Leo, in one respect, Leo, and I guess the role he's being put in terms of this show reminds me a little bit of like It's a Sin, and how in that show, like the main character, kind of, he was in the position of being in denial about the seriousness of what's happening around him, like in terms of like the AIDS crisis. Like, I think it's something similar happening here. Like when you see in Leo's conversation with Melba, Leo's the one downplaying how bad it is, and kind of being put. If this was a political cartoon, Leo would be the one who's obviously in the wrong, right? Where Melba is like saying what the author actually thinks. Leo's like, oh, the pendulum swings back and forth. It all goes in a cycle, and we'll all be fine. Whereas Melba's saying like, no, you aren't seeing like the full like weight of what's happening around you, and I think that's ultimately going to be your undoing. I think is sort of what's implied there. I think that's probably going to be like the essence of Leo's tragic flaw in terms of this show.
I love how he's positioned like that. How in all these different ways he's very much RTD. Like he's the same age as RTD, as Neo said. There's lots of other things, his class, his position in life. Even his relationships are very, very much, this is an RTD character. Self-insert feels not quite right. And the way he is wrong about everything all the time in just these tiny little ways that don't even add together into a coherent worldview is just fascinating to me. I love the recurring beat of Leo being the only person who's noticed any policies of the British Labour government. He's just seething the whole time about all these tiny little changes to the politics of running a small business, and blames the Labour government all the time, despite being an outright lefty guy himself. He's just full of contradictions, and he'll say one thing, and then in the next conversation with a new person, he will take up the opposite position to what he took in the previous conversation, because he's a real person, and real people are really messy like that.
Another thing with the RTD sort of not quite self-insert, but like slightly like it's expressing part of himself there, is the generational aspect. Like when Leo has that speech to Melba, kind of off the cuff almost, like kind of out of pocket, when he starts talking about how, well, I've done my bit, I've marched, I'm the older generation, I can sit back and relax and leave it to the youth now. Whereas he says that so he can be told, like, no, you're completely wrong. by Melba. And I think that is kind of RTD grappling with a feeling that he is kind of grappled with as part of the generation he's in. Like, I'm sure he and people like him maybe felt at some point that they could be like Leo and just say, well, it's not my problem anymore. But like they can now, like, RTD can see around him that that's not the case. Like that is going to be facing a reckoning of its own very soon. So I think that idea of Leo feeling like a sort of paternal to the next generation is kind of constantly in play. Like when he gives that speech, sort of defending to Clive, defending the concept of pronouns to Clive, even though elsewhere he's kind of complaining to Z about pronouns and how annoying it is to sort of like keep track of them. It's sort of that way. He's like doing it in sort of a defensive way, like this elder statesman sort of way, even though he's like not quite necessarily like in tune with the youth himself, if you see what I mean. I think that's kind of one of the things you were referring to there, Oliver, like the contradictory positions. And
that's lovely that conversation is sort of passed on from his conversation with Stephanie, where she blames him for inventing self-identification. This very entangled, and the whole show's doing this thing where different aspects of out of the headlines politics are all entangled with each other. Queerness is, racism is, all these things are interconnected by the characters and their internally contradictory positions. But he then passes on that thing that his friend says to him to Clive, saying, no, actually, you invented this. You did this. You pushed us into a box. What did you expect? And yeah, that all the way through the show, you can see really clearly how one decision leads to the character saying something they would never have said one scene earlier. The pace of this whole thing is incredible. Because it doesn't feel like everything's on fire and moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. At least yet, I imagine it'll get there. But there is a huge change every single scene, and Leo's character swings in all these different directions in a way that's really engaging.
I love that dialogue that Leo has about that. Well, it's, the straight people's fault that, we identify this way, because it's such a, I think it's very relatable to, if you're intelligent, to do these really clever kind of rhetorical pirouettes like that. Like it's very clever, the argument he's making, but he must full know well the kind of artifice of what he's saying, and that it's certainly not going to resound with Clive at all. But like you're saying, it's channeling through. He's been thinking over what he's talked about and been accused of by Steph earlier, and he's a smart guy, so he can, manipulate language in like a cool way. I could really empathize with, he's making a great speech there, but it's kind of useless for that moment, and certainly for the man he's saying it to.
And also, I'm not sure characters like Z would even... Yeah, I'm not sure she would even agree with him that, for example, transness is something that straight cis people have done to her, rather than it being innate to who she is, right? She would probably disagree with him, or at least very well could. Lots of trans people would.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop him making this, like you say, mostly like just bluster argument that's very convincing. And is it right?
I think its heart is kind of in the right place. I think it's just not necessarily argued in the way that makes a great deal of sense. I think the idea that gender is a construct from policing, and it comes about from how it's policed, and kind of how sort of people are sort of how it is kind of a something that exists to kind of force you to behave one way or another, and how that kind of lends itself to people sort of kind of navigating that in different ways. Like, it makes sense, but like I think the framing it as like it's your fault and we're just doing what you forced us to do, again, it's like that feels like a sort of a compromise, like a rhetorical compromise that's not really grounded in sort of talking to trans people. It's what someone who's cis would imagine like that is a defense of trans people looks like, rather than what a trans people would necessarily argue.
It has that kind of air of I guess pity about it, like the bet is kind of we should be kinder, or you can't accuse trans people of whatever because you caused them, but it's kind of framing them as like a negative consequence, right? It's if cis people weren't bullies, then trans people wouldn't be manifesting. It reminds me back in Russell has talked in interviews around about the woke 1.0 era, whatever you want to call it. Remember that very brief era where brands were fully on. We were getting McDonald's talking about, retweeting black trans women and stuff like that. That very brief era of woke 1.0. But I remember in the kind of lead up to what will become that era, a lot of straight people were kind of getting on board with gay marriage and stuff in the way they were kind of just saying and realizing, wait, it's not their fault. They didn't choose to be gay. They're just kind of suffering because they have to be gay. And that's really sad. So let's go easy on them. Let's let them get married because they were born this way and they didn't choose to be gay. And that's a pretty awful thing. You know, it's like the kind of rhetorical thing of the sympathy, but like through the pity. I guess Leo's thing is they were bullied because they didn't fit the gender binary great, so they've chosen to be that way. It's like, I guess their heart is vaguely in the right place, but it's kind of it's constructing a kind of pitying framing, I think.
And in that period, in that big fight for gay marriage, a lot of the discourse was built around the idea that being gay is like genetic or completely sealed in from birth, which I don't know, I don't think is true, but is a very convincing rhetorical argument, which is the same kind of thing Leo's doing all the way through the show, or all the way through these first 2 episodes, where he stakes positions and he says things that are rhetorically impressive, that are showboaty, and convincing. And are they true? A lot of the time, no.
Oh, I loved the recurring beat of him. Lying is too big a word, but the exaggerating, the slight hyperboles. When he starts retelling the story of the start of the show and adding in that he was like naked, and then each time he tells it, it kind of gets bigger and bigger. I assume this is going to be part of what leads to his horrible death. Is his propensity towards slight little mistruths, I think, is a really relatable and kind of a endearing character trait. But I saw an interview Russell did in France recently where he's talking up. He had a great English teacher for his A-levels back in the day who really harped on about like hamartia, like Othello with his jealousy and Hamlet with his inactivity, and that really spoke to Russell. And so when he writes characters, he tries to give them, their fatal flaw, and whether they full on die or not, he really likes having it pronounced. There's something with their personality. They just keep doing it and they can't help but keep doing it. And that's kind of what undoes them in the end. And he spoke a little bit about Richie in It's a Sin. And now Leo is falling into that pattern as well. And he said for Leo, it's arrogance. Arrogance is the big problem with him. And I guess that kind of showboating stuff we're talking about kind of plays into that. And I just love it because it's like the show never really full on, except for maybe his partner's new female partner. It doesn't really directly call out Leo for lying exactly, but we as the viewers can see we saw that, and he's not lying, he's just slightly exaggerating things. But I feel like that showboating nature of his personality is probably going to be a big part of what unwinds him.
See, like that moment when Maggie, sort of the new partner, kind of just asked him, like, did that really happen? Like, displayed the slightest bit of skepticism about what we know is a lie. The fact that completely derailed him is so interesting. Like, surely if you know that you're lying about a story and you're exaggerating it, like, surely you could just, maybe you could just, some people might be able to just roll with that, saying, no word of a lie, it totally happened, I was stark bullet naked. But like, just that moment of being doubted even slightly, like he and later in the car with Stephanie, like, he turns it around, he's like, oh god, wow, she's so lame, can you believe she said that to me? Wow, talk about not being able to read the room. But it's like, again, well, he was the one who was lying, it's a bit like, I kind of didn't blame her that much for doubting. Like, she knew he was telling the porky pie, so it's not really her fault. They're very mean to her. Like, they even called her, like, Baron Maggie. Like, why are they making fun of her for not being able to have kids? Like, it's very mean-spirited.
First thing he says is, Maggie, 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 out, out, out.
Is that a reference to, like, Margaret Thatcher? Is that a thing?
Yeah, Margaret Thatcher. She says that dates you.
Yeah.
My read on that particular moment was, Maggie clocks that he's lying, and in a way where it seems like she's generally suspicious of his stories and expects him to lie. And why would she do that? Well, she's now in a long-term relationship with his ex, so my feeling was that Curtis, like, told her, yes, he lies all the time. And it's that vulnerability. It feels like a betrayal to just be hit in the face with, oh, you've talked about me behind my back and talked about how much I lie.
Yeah. So I guess they have to laugh about it afterwards, because it's actually it's actually much more hurtful than maybe it seems on the surface.
There's another flaw about Leo I've seen Russell talk about. At the BFI interviews he was doing, he was talking about both Leo and some of his other gay friends, saying they can over-sexualize things and be glib and interfere too much, and he compared it to Stewart in Queer as Folk as, these sorts of unlikable traits. But it's saying, he thinks it's more interesting to write queer characters that have traits that grate against people like that. For me, possibly the funniest moment in the first 2 episodes is when that mate of Leo's starts talking about prolapsing and Clive just winces in agony. But the glibness and the quote unquote over sexualization, if you want to see it that way, I think those are interesting things to kind of play with in terms of Leo and possibly flaws of him as well.
Yeah, it seems to me like RTD is maybe I could be like calling my shot too early here. It feels like RTD is maybe being a little bit critical of like just how like grotesque and kind of rude kind of the queer banter can be sometimes a little bit. Like maybe I'm not saying he wants us to be like, all chaste and pure for homogenized for the straight acceptance or whatever. But like I think that he really leans into that idea that like specifically I noticed that moment when Clive actually pipes up and interrupts that mate of Leo's is when he says I was like a battered wife. And it's like bringing in like domestic violence against women in that really like kind of callous, kind of jocular way. Like it's sort of a sign of sort of the way that this banter is not always necessarily innocent. Like there can often be a misogynist undercurrent to it. And so I think like RTD is not necessarily portraying stuff like that as like necessarily he's not depicting gay life as all like sunshine and rainbows and all perfectly innocent. I think he's implying maybe in some small ways that we are like somewhat responsible for, not in a super victim blaming way, but in a little bit responsible for some of the bad vibes that people get sometimes, like the over sexualization. I feel like RTD is maybe pushing back against that a bit.
Yeah, there's all these ways that Leo's personal flaws and virtues as well all sort of link in with the bigger social dialogue. That he's not the only queer character who tells big stories and performs a lot, right? The scene you're talking about with, I don't know what his name is, but he's telling the same kind of story that's clearly exaggerated, clearly a lie, to make Leo's big fatal flaw, that's the first thing we find out about him, representative of a quirk of the subculture, is really interesting. And I think you get a very similar thing with Clive, where he's extremely closed as a character. He's closed to the audience. He's closed to all the other characters. David Morrissey's performance is so sort of bricky, cold-faced almost all the time, with only peeks through at what he's actually thinking, as a way of talking about the opposite problem in cishet society, being so closed that no one is ever talking about themselves or their emotions, or, in Clive's case, even having real joy in his life.
Clive is like so uncomfortably real to watch. Like whenever he's sort of, maybe he'll just casually make some barb that's like not meant to be taken quite seriously. Like, yeah, go on, piss off. Yeah, just leave me do all the work. Like straight men in real life do that all the time. It really fucking gets on my tits. Like especially older ones. Like my that just feels like I'm looking at all the like men who I meet for various reasons. Like not in a grinder way. I just mean like in a regular way. like it's like it does feel like a really authentic sort of representation of just that casual spikiness and how it's like almost omnipresent. And if you're not quite really used to that, like certainly Leo isn't, then it becomes like so awkward and uncomfortable to navigate. Like some of those situations just feel I related on like a deep level, like in my bones, to some of those awkward interactions that they had.
There's this tension. It feels like a very dad-coded, like paternal thing where like there's kind of a good Clive or sort of a likable, bantery Clive in there, but you only get enough tastes of it to kind of want it before the spikiness like shuts it, and then you feel like punished or deprived. Like that moment in Spit and Polish where he's like dancing along and they're like amused how he set up that joke and they're amused at his dancing, and so that everyone's getting along for like 10 seconds and then he cuts it off and he's like rude again. Or those moments like where he's kind of bantering a little bit with Leo, like when Leo's first let in the house before he starts like kind of accusing him of like pedo vibes. It's if he were just a total and utter dick, it would be completely easy to close him off. But it almost feels crueler that he pokes out as like a kind of okay person at times.
Yeah, you can see there are moments where you can see that Leo and Clive could maybe in another life have sort of been friends.
Yeah.
Like, because there are things that they can kind of connect with. Like, I think also in the Spit and Polish, when Clive is first kind of pissed off with Leo for sort of casually sort of smearing workmen and electricians and stuff, then it sort of turns the other way because, like, you know, he said, well, what if I asked you if you're diluting your drinks? And Leo's like, no. And then Clive says, God, if you're giving 20% of your profits to your ex, you should start diluting it. And it's like that way of kind of sympathizing almost with kind of the unfair situation of the ex getting all that money, and kind of like almost being on Leo's side a little bit. Like, you should stick it to him. You should stick it to your ex. You should like start screwing him over. Like, it's not like the closest thing, but like there's like a recognition. It's not like oh, your ex was a man, I can't talk to you about this, I can't engage with you about this. Like, it's not that. He's willing to sort of be part of that conversation, and it's like sort of make a kind of jokey suggestion in a way. So again, like there is clear like potential how they could have connected in some way.
And at the same time, I think that's a great point. And at the same time, when Clive is able to engage in like normal conversation with Leo, he's only ever saying things that he could also say to a straight man.
Mm.
So your ex is taking 20%, I would start diluting it, is banter he could have with any straight guy who is in a similar situation. When they connect, it's around queerness rather than through it, which I found really interesting. I love that sequence where they're walking from where they park the cars to the Spit and Polish, and they don't find anything to talk about. There's that little exchange about football. But then once they're inside, they start talking about property and managing a business and paying mortgages, and they actually are able to connect loads, and it builds up to that water down your beers joke. And they actually do find a thing to connect over in the fact they're both, you know, self-employed professionals. But I thought that was really sweet, and you can see how if this was a different kind of bar, if they were both different kinds of men, they actually would have a lot to connect over. But alas.
That little moment you mentioned, like, slightly earlier when I think Clive just says, you watching tonight? And Leo's like, is that a football question? I kind of like that moment because it's just the assumption that Leo will understand just from saying you're watching tonight, because it's so, like, embedded in the culture for straight people, whereas if you're gay, then you're kind of at a remove slightly. It's not that there aren't gay football fans, but it's like, if you aren't sort of super immersed in that sort of lad kind of culture for your whole life, you won't necessarily intuitively get straight away. I mean, I knew that's what Clive was talking about, and I thought that was great writing because I could tell immediately. But like, it's also great writing that Leo like didn't recognize it.
That very first moment of banter where Leo has come into the house to wait for the keys to come round right at the start of the first episode, and Clive calls his wife to get Stephanie's number, and she has found out what happened to Leo by a nosy neighbour across the street, and Clive doesn't keep it secret that he knows. Like, he answers his part of the conversation and then turns around and makes eye contact with Leo, making it very clear, oh, I know what's actually happened. I know what you're doing. It's so interesting when so much of the show is about keeping secrets, and so much of what Leo does is lying and keeping secrets. Clive gets this upper hand on Leo. He gets this gossip about him and just immediately turns it on him in a way that's fun. But it makes a really interesting contrast with the sort of more cliquey gossip of the spit and polish.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. Like, the gossip and the spit and polish is almost, you cannot let Clive know that we know any of this. And there's so much happening around Clive. Like the stuff, the secrets about Hot Saul, the secrets about, like, maybe they know about his supposed affair, and then of course about George, his son. Like, it's literally all this conversation happening around Clive. At one point, they're peering into the security camera feed. I can't believe we know more about his son than he does. And I guess maybe that almost feeds into the arrogance in a way a little bit. Like the just how much they're talking about this guy behind his back. It is like, there is a mean aspect to it. Like, it's almost like he's less than human to them in a way. Like, they're so willing to just treat his life and his world as like fodder for their amusement. Like, there is like a degree of cruelty to it.
There's a great recurring image in episode 2 around the Hot Saul stuff, where we get shots of someone looking at their phone, angled away from Clive, with Clive in the background behind the phone screen, so he can't see it. And that comes up, I think, 3 times in episode 2, that someone's turning their phone to keep a secret from Clive, which I thought was super interesting, just as a little visual motif.
There's something about straight men.
Speaking from experience, are we?
Ain't they just?
David Morrissey talked about it in an interview. I think it gets to the spikiness we were talking about. He said, we talk about the patriarchy affecting women, but I think it affects all of us. He continues, it affects men in the sense that out there in the world, the only real acceptable emotion that I think men are allowed to express is anger. Vulnerability or insecurity is not acceptable. You have to have an opinion about everything. You have to have a stance. You can't show frivolity. Anger is acceptable always. What Clive is seeing, what a lot of people are seeing, is that anger, that othering, that ridiculing of people, you see it in people in positions of great power. Whether you're intellectualizing that or not, you are seeing that it's being rewarded. It is the way to be successful. There is a type of masculinity that you are encouraged to embody. It is being shown to you all the time. Clive is vulnerable. He's lost the ability to support his family. He's begging people for work, including Leo, which he hates. He's very little left. Everything that was sure in his life is now rotting away. Everything he was promised all through his life, none of those things have been delivered. So he wants to kick out. Where's mine? That way of thinking will be constantly reaffirmed to him online. It causes this emptiness and lack of connection in his life, which you see later in the show. It's a lack of love, connection, or understanding. That's where all this darkness and hatred can build in that vacuum of his life. So I think that's interesting. The kind of it's self-imposed. You know, this straight man thing of all we can do is anger and we can't like have fun. Like, but you're the no one just imposed that on you. There's not a matriarchy where women like decided that's what you have to do, and it's not like queer people had the power to like impose that on them. I get the huge burden that is, but it's also like you like he's kind of imposing that on his sons, presumably, in the way he's raised them. It's not like do you get what I mean? Where it's like you can complain about the culture, but it's also like you're the one enforcing it as well. Am I being mean? Well,
it is sort of like it's about how you kind of learn to be a man in the first place, isn't it? Because, like, I mean, certainly the whole thing of like knowing which emotions are acceptable, that comes from almost being punished for displaying the wrong ones. Like, certainly as you're in your formative years,
yeah,
like maybe if you cry or if you kind of come off weird, if you don't fit in, you will be ostracized. Like, people might treat you weird, people might have a go at you, your parents, your granddad, whatever, your dad, men in your life, they might kind of look at you funny. And you might see kind of who they make jokes about as well, who they treat as fodder to be mocked and bullied, and you think, I don't want to be like that. So it's like, it's not like, I don't want to like compress it down to like an individual responsibility thing, because it is like sort of again, it's not like women imposing on them or queer people imposing on them. It's like I guess the community of straight men as a whole, which are also part of the wider world system, I guess. Like, so it's sort of creating that mindset in men.
We get a tiny little glimpse of the sort of the pressure cooker of masculinity in that moment where Leo walks past the window and they're watching the football, and Clive's got all his mates round, which is lovely. That one of the only glimpses we get into that kind of masculinity is like passing by the window, tiny little scene, but we get this whole everyone's having fun and everyone's bantering, but there's a lot of barbs in the jokes, and they are jokes at Clive's expense, and it's in front of his kids, and he has to push back in the same way. And I think you can see how that sort of that very masculine space creates the characters' masculine responses, their shieldedness, and their emotional suppression created in that environment out of other people's emotional suppression.
And also to add in that scene, you've got the sort of the playing about with homoeroticism, which seems to be almost ubiquitous for straight men at this point. You've got the guy mooning the rest of the group, and everyone's, oh, not in front of Clive, he's a married man, like almost implying there's some kind of like proposed hypothetical sexual element in there. And then sort of them all making jokes about the fact that he he displayed some nudity to them all.
Yeah.
I think that also links in very earlier on in episode 1, when Clive tells Saul to like put some clothes on, Saul flashes his bum at the camera. It's like that, it's like almost because it's only because they know there is no threat of actual homosexuality intruding here, they can kind of make it into a joke. I think like it just seems to be like almost the main joke for straight men at this point. It's the concept of gayness and gay sex. Like it's an obsession. It's really strange. But yeah, I think that is a huge part of it. It's almost like, and maybe that feeds in to the spikiness you're describing, the emotional suppression. It's like the idea of male on male connection is in itself like a joke, something that is put there so it can be rebuffed as a joke. It's really fascinating, isn't it?
It's especially good because Clive is always put on the back foot and made upset by the queer characters doing sexy jokes, right? That's what upsets him. That's the thing that he gets most upset about is, oh, it's always dirty with you lot, isn't it? It's always a sex joke. They're doing all the same, not just the same amount of sex jokes in his friend group, but literally the same sex jokes, the same gay sex jokes. But when they do it, because they're straight, it's okay. There's something about doing jokes about gay sex while also being gay that is deeply offensive to him, in a way that he wouldn't admit. I thought that was a great little comparison.
Yeah, that interplay I think is really interesting. This is a trite thing to say. It's maybe like a Leo-esque, rhetorically useless thing to say. But I think it's really ironic that if we're going through this like Clive paradigm of, straight man masculinity and all that entails, if stereotypical masculine like traits would be talking, probably bravery or protecting others and providing for others, but very much bravery and that sort of integrity, honor, but the courage to be a man, to assert your authority over others is kind of, I feel like, the prototypical masculine trait. But what we're all talking about here with how these men treat each other is they're kind of constantly folding, where they're refusing to have like sincere connections, like we were talking about with, how the whole idea of being gay or being close to men is just like a joke. They're refusing to have these sincere connections. They're constantly cutting each other down with like the barbs we were talking about. And like they're like little shriveled up shrimps, living in these masculine paradigms that they're not happy in. But like, because like Gig said, their fathers or their grandfathers or whatever enforce them on it, they're just still being like little boys living that way. And so, but it's all very coded as laddish and masculine, because that's the dominant culture. But whereas if you look at Leo, or you can probably more so, the trans stuff at the Spit and Polish, they're the ones who, like we see in episode 1, are actually putting themselves in threat of actual violence by asserting who they want to be, to the world, and by actually saying, no, this is who I am, or this is who I want to be, this is how I feel. Like, I know it's like, it's flipping around, in a trite way that I'm sure the straight and queer people alike have heard about many a time, but it's like the infinitely more masculine thing, I think, in a way, if we're taking those masculine values as whatever, they say they are, to, assert your authority over society in that way, despite others pushing back on you, and to assert yourself like bravely in a way. I just think it's kind of a cute or a frustrating irony is that, Leo is infinitely more masculine than Clive, I would say, if we're going in that paradigm, because Leo is the one who's had to put up with, the pushback from the world for saying he is who he is, like he says in that pronoun speech to Clive. So I just think there's this awful, like, pathetic little irony with that kind of straight laddish culture where they're actually the ones acting like scared little boys, by refusing to extend themselves beyond that kind of noxious culture.
Well, it is very much the case that a lot of this almost like fascistic masculinity that is kind of becoming so popular, or has been popular in some way or another among kind of extreme, in an extreme sort of community sense, that is very much like you describe it. It's just being 12. It's just going back to being 12 years old and just being as pathetic and willfully ignorant and childish as possible, but in this twisted way reframed into that actually being amazing and badass. It's super awesome to be a child, an infant, an anti-intellectual. It's actually super awesome because I'm like a heroic caveman sort of figure who doesn't bother with these foolish, trite concerns and doesn't bother weak and woke feelings. Like, it's the opposite of maturity in every single way, but that is somehow framed as masculine, even though, like, it's not like the masculine in any kind of practical way, in any sort of traditional, old-fashioned way of, like, I guess, trying to care for others or protect others. Or it's like it's become this very individually focused, only what I want and desire right now in a base way matters. That is what being a man apparently means. Just being this, like, isolated solipsistic universe unto yourself and just pursuing your primal urges for whatever reason, just gorging yourself on candy becomes almost masculine in a way. Like but in, I guess, in a figurative sense, like in every other respect. Like it's really, really strange, but like I guess it's the concept of masculinity curdling and like eating itself and becoming this twisted parody of itself that just seems to happen once you burrow far enough into this idea of defining it against women and against everyone else in the world.
I think it's notable too that the housebreak scene in the second act of episode 1 has women fighting with baseball bats and getting a gun out of the trunk of her car and then doing a car chase. I think that's a very deliberate, like Nia was saying, sort of play on flipping around the qualities associated with masculinity and showing that the heroic traits that people like Clive imagine are the domain of men, and straight men particularly, are in this episode all women and all queer people. The gun, I think, is a particularly fun one. Maybe it comes up later in the series, but my feeling is it's quite an intentional RTD, out of nowhere, plot-breaking mechanic, used in the way that it's most effective as an RTD trope. Like, sudden gun out of nowhere can be done very badly, like in Reality War. But here, I think it's a really fun beat because it is so out of nowhere and it so cuts against what you imagine a group of young people who work at a gay bar, what their world might entail. You would never have imagined one of them hunts in their back garden. And that's such a masculine coded thing that it's sort of a twist in and of itself. And that whole thing, that's the one like action sequence of the show so far. and for that to be an explicitly queer thing was I think a really interesting use. Yeah, a really interesting inversion.
That's kind of a device, isn't it? A character having like an unexpected badass history. Like, you know, when Judy says like her uncle's a bodyguard of the Shah of Iran? I think it's what she said. Yeah, it's one of the things that it's never going to be explicated upon. It's not been like particularly thought through in some realistic way. It's just like an anecdotal thing that's like, huh? Sort of make you go like double take and wow, there's all kinds of crazy like lives and worlds out there, aren't there? So again, I think it's kind of almost comic in a way because it's deliberately exaggerated. I think a little bit. It's one of those things where sort of a character kind of gets to be a bit badass by pulling out something that's like not like you said, like you wouldn't expect.
On the going back slightly to how masculinity is enforced on itself by masculinity, I absolutely love the beat in the second episode where Saul is getting hit on at the bar and he jokes about it to his dad in the same way. You know, he goes, "Hey, this is great. Everyone's hitting on me. Ain't I cool?" And Clive tenses up and he doesn't like it. And he like raises it as a complaint. But to Saul, who's a little bit younger, a little bit less, and because he's a sex worker, I imagine quite a lot more in contact with queerness and sexual marginalia, I suppose. But because of all those things, because he's sort of halfway out of Clive's dark.
That's an amazing phrasing, by the way. I love how you said that.
Thanks. He loves it, actually, and you can easily imagine Saul just coming to the bar by himself and having a fun evening, and enjoying it. But his dad enforces the discomfort on him, and the second episode ends with the Saul's sex work page getting shared on the group chat, so presumably Clive finds out at some point. And one can imagine how much discomfort and hate Clive would have towards that, and how much of that discomfort would come from the fact that some gay people enjoy this content. Whereas Saul finds out that one of the staff members is watching, and he's like, well, as long as you're paying, all good, mate. Yeah, super interesting.
Yeah.
Saul is so fascinating. I feel like he's going to disappoint us later on, because he seems like he's wavering on that line where he could swing back and like, because like you say, in that conversation where he's kind of he finds out one of the kind of spit and polish staff is in his audience, he's still kind of like, and he sort of like, he very kind of playfully and like politely rejects the offer of a collaboration and doing any sort of homosexual acts. But like, he seems to be in this slight delusion that his thing is intended for women. I think, we discussed it a little bit earlier. Like the idea, like, I think if he was being realistic about this, obviously he's going to have men watching this. His audience might even be mostly men. Yeah, I think it's entirely possible. So, and I think kind of his willingness to kind of inhabit that sort of slight delusional realm where this is like a nice and straight, wholesome thing he's doing, and that this is for a female audience, indicates that he hasn't fully stepped out into that world yet, where he can completely accept the idea of being a sex object for like a male gaze and that sort of thing. So that suggests still a slight discomfort there, not fully expressed, but like there. So I feel like if the wrong thing happened, I think Saul could probably be pulled back into sort of the dark, into the dark zone, and start kind of behaving or like betray in a slightly more homophobic way. But like where he is right now, like he's so sort of funny. It's kind of sweet how he can kind of be sort of okay, and it's not that sweet, but like it's you can see, like, he's so unlike Clive in that way. He's so willing to kind of embrace it in a way. He's so fast. I'm really interested in how Clive raised that a son like that.
George creeps me out, the other son. I know he's a child. He's 16, but even before the episode 2 cold open, something just seems cold. Yeah, I guess cold in him. I was I'm so fascinated. We'll talk about the amazingly edited conversation that he and Leo have in episode 2. But what really got me was, and he seemed so much like his dad's son, was like they're talking about, gay sex at length that George has been having. And at the end, after Clive talks to him, he looks at his phone, and Leo's in like very dad mode. I think he phrases it like, "Sorry, must ask. I'm ensuring. Are you having safe sex?" And George says something like, "That's disgusting," or "You're disgusting," and he scowls and he like puts his phone away. But like, what's going on there? What do you mean? You were the one telling him about the sex you've been having, and like, it's kind of a back and forth who really initiated that conversation, because Leo did kind of stalk him to restart the conversation. But I feel like Saul, I agree that he'll probably disappoint us, but I think George will definitely disappoint us.
Yeah, George seems to waver so much. It's like there's something pulling him to kind of reach out to Leo, but every time he does, he immediately regrets and retreats back into himself. So he texts help, and he's like, "No, blocked, go away." And he's like, "Oh, but no, I love this boy, I love him so much. Oh, and he was coming, and he did this and that." And then like when Leo asks, "Are you having safe sex?" He's like, "Oh no, don't talk to me about sex. You're gross. So you're an old man. you creep. He's got nothing to do with this. Shut up." So it's like it's I think it's this pull back and forth, like massive inner conflict. I mean, he's a teenager, and he's a very, very troubled teenager. I think like when he's just like whining about, "Oh, but I love him," it's like there's something so childish about him in a way that unfortunately feels very real. I think, and kids can just be such annoying assholes like that, but it's just because they have so many feelings.
It's also what's happening to George in the story he's telling Leo. In that he's with this friend of his, who says that he loves him, and then goes cold, starts talking about him and laughing about him. And Leo says, sometimes men get angry. If he's angry, you need to stay away because you need to stay safe. George is dealing with from somebody else exactly the same thing he's doing, where regret, he has a moment of openness about his own sexuality, and then regret and heteronormativity comes crashing back in, and he doesn't just go quiet, he gets angry at gay people for his being gay. And it's that same response that he's experiencing, right? He's angry at Leo in the same way that his friend is angry at him.
Yeah, it's a good point. Essentially, like his reaction of, "Oh, how disgusting of you to bring up sex with me." That is, I guess, in a way, that is coming from internalized homophobia. Like, even though, like, I can kind of see how, on one hand, the idea of like a much older person who's not really in your relationship, sort of intruding in this very personal thing, could feel gross. But again, like, you sort of opened up about that. I think so that reflexive sort of knee jerk, like, "No, actually, I feel really gross talking about this. Shut up." That comes from. I think that does come from like an inner disgust at the fact that this is happening in the first place, that the idea of sex and gay sex and safe sex and whatever, like this is something in himself that he's actually finding gross, and it's being like represented by Leo.
Yeah, that whole sequence is just beautiful. It's a whole act. So one of my big notes is that this feels like such an experimental show, despite not really having a big experimental premise. It's not like Years and Years where there's a really big idea on a conceptual level driving it. But and this is where Channel 4 is really interesting, with the ad breaks, each episode's split up into, I think, 4 like acts between the ad breaks. And those acts are, across the first 2 episodes, often like conceptually driven in and of themselves. So one of the whole acts is just that text conversation, where there's almost nothing said out loud and it's just text on screen. And that sequence, just stunning. And it made me cry a little bit.
Yeah.
I thought it was beautiful.
It is really, really superbly, artfully done. I think the because it could have been done in a repetitive way where someone sends text appears on screen, read the text, other person reacts to the text. Instead, it flows around in this really organic feeling, natural way where and this has to have been done pretty much entirely in the editing room. They felt kind of where the characters' like reactions and emotions were at every beat, like waiting for the next message to come, reading it. Like they don't always put a close-up of the new message when it comes through.
Yeah.
Kind of they just maybe leave it small in the frame and you quickly read it and then you see what's coming next. Like it has this really like dynamic energy to it. Sometimes we'll see their face instead of what they're looking at. Like every little twitch and change in that conversation is tracked so well. Like it's an absolute art form to make two characters texting each other for that long feel like riveting, like almost face-to-face drama. It's like it's a ballet act. It is absolute like masterclass of both like writing and editing. Like it is, it's so good. Like, I mean, it's one of those scenes you can just rewatch over and over just to appreciate how magisterially it's been executed.
It's interesting. It does it without, there's no like visual gimmick for it as well.
Yeah, it's not Sherlock.
Like it's not trying to do, it's not doing something wacky with like how to display the text. Like you're saying, it's not really sticking to one way of doing it. It's just like, it's the sense of flow it creates with the editing. It's really impressive. Yeah.
There's one of those techniques is you'll see someone typing out the first few words of their message, just enough that you have a sort of hint of what they're talking about. And then you see the other person react to what that message says. And then you see the full message. Just this way of parceling out information in a way you can't do if it's not a text conversation. It's all the way through, just riveting. There's a wonderful beat at the beginning of that section where Leo gets the message saying help as a cliffhanger, and then he goes to the fridge, he gets out a bottle of wine, and then he puts the bottle of wine back without drinking it. Just one of those great little beats where this is a stressful situation, I would rather be a little bit drunk, but actually it's so important I shouldn't be.
I love the moments when Leo is typing an insanely long message and we just see it going on and on and on and on and on and on and on because he cares like so much about getting this right and saying everything he possibly can. It's like and you see close up of each word being typed and it just seems to keep just going and going. Like I love that because it's just like there's an emotion to that. Like it's not just text on screen. Like that's a physical act that he's doing and he's kind of pouring all his feelings into that. Like the pace of him typing it out, kind of the tension of us kind of waiting for it to be sent. Like I'm struggling to think of anything similar I've seen that's done that well, just in terms of making a text to conversation feel like as real as it actually does in real life. Just the emotions that you have while trying to have a discourse with someone over the phone.
And that thing of at the end of the sequence, he records a message and then isn't sure whether to send it. So we've heard what he's actually said, and then there's a 2-minute conversation with between George and Clive, and then he presses send. So we hear what he's said, but it is only heard by the other character after this whole other conversation sort of inserted halfway in, which takes the air out of the whole thing.
And George doesn't even listen to it, does he? He just sees the next message, which is like having sex. Like, oh, gross. And just tragically ignores this beautiful, compassionate message that Leo has left. It's like, I think that's like that almost encapsulates the whole thing, doesn't it? I think that's probably going to be a symbol of where these two characters' story is going. I think Leo tries very, very hard to kind of like help George and set George on the right path, but he maybe oversteps like a millimeter too far, and that shuts the whole thing down.
I don't know what you two think, but I think even without the cold open, I think Leo is a good man, and I think he's trying to do a really good thing there, where he can see this child is he's in pain, he's in a bit of trouble, and he desperately wants to help him. But I think, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this, but it's so motivated by projection. Like we get those lovely, like shots where we're like seeing Leo's memories, like Leo's comparable memories as he's like talking to George. And I think there's nothing wrong. That's, a good part of being an older man is I've gone through pain and therefore, I can advise younger people, even if not how to avoid that pain, at least how to work through that pain. That's all a very good thing. But this is his neighbor, and this is a homophobic family he's talking to, and this kid himself is a kid, and so he's very confused as well. I mean, he's obviously gay. I don't mean in that sense, but he's obviously confused about how he feels about that, and kind of which side he's taking in some of these battles across the houses. And Clive saying he's texting a child, and the child's phone rules are that the dad gets to see the phone. Like and if George were 18 or 19 or 20, I think this would be a very different thing. But this is a child, and they are talking about sex, and in something I'm sure is going to come back. I'm sure it's a Chekhov's gun. Is where Leo says something about you should be having all the hot sex you want, or something like on voice. Like I think every impulse Leo is having, I think, is moral and is good, and I think there's nothing corrupt or wrong about what he's wanting and trying to do there. But it's a kid, and it's about sex, and I was screaming at him like, man, for your own sake, you really should not be doing this. It's your neighbor. He's a kid. You don't know how this family necessarily works. Oh my God. I don't think, and thanks to the cold open, I know this doesn't end well for you. I understood so deeply, and I sympathized so deeply with Leo there. And I think he's doing a good thing, but I don't think it's what he should have done. It was overstepping to track George down. I think that is probably the bit where he went a little bit too, when George is reaching out to him, it's one thing, but he kind of stalked him a little bit to reinitiate the conversation, and I just think everything from there is I'm scared.
Yeah, so there's so much here. I think one of the big things that keeps jumping out to me is the tension around the fact that, as Melba says, 16 is actually a legal adult in terms of consent to sex in the UK. But, and I think this is what the show's really talking about this indirectly, historically, the age of consent in the UK for gay sex has been higher than for straight sex. And there's this sort of implicit thing that it would be that because they are talking about gay sex, 16 is particularly young. This sort of implicit idea that even though the law doesn't recognize it, people feel that the age of consent is actually should be a bit higher for gay relationships. And you get a similar thing with Saul, where Clive says, oh, come on, you can't make comments about him, he's 25. And Leo goes, what do you mean? You think you don't make comments about 25-year-old women? Which is all a bit weird, because they are both old men, and maybe you shouldn't be making comments about 25-year-old women. But there's this inequality, and this runs all the way through the show, these little implicit differences in how people think about scenarios that are very similar, except for the sexuality of the people involved. And I think what's really interesting about the text conversation is it's so specific. Leo is talking really specifically and giving really specific advice that George wouldn't actually be able to get from other places, really. I mean, Leo goes to set him up with a youth group, so maybe that'll work in the long run, although obviously not. But the specificity of the whole thing is what makes it so beautiful, and what moved me so much. The fact that Leo's giving advice about the specific relationship dynamics of young gay relationships, and especially young closeted gay relationships, and the idea that it's particularly common for men to say, I love you, while they're finishing, and then to regret it and get angry and upset afterwards. And The issue is that it's exactly that specificity that makes it inappropriate, that makes it a real step over the line and talking explicitly about sex with your young neighbour. But that's also why it's valuable, but it's also why it's not acceptable, which is that tension. You can see why Leo would say all of that and why it's important that he does, and also why lots of people would consider it a massive violation. But also, a neighbour isn't a formalised relationship. Like, a teacher can't have a conversation like this. A youth pastor or whatever can't have a conversation like this because those are formal relationships with rules and systems and HR departments and whatever. But a neighbour isn't a formalised relationship. They're just someone you know, which blurs it a little bit more, even. Like, if a teacher had this conversation, that would be a very obvious violation of child safety. But a neighbour isn't that formalised, and it's that ambiguity and those blurred lines which look like they're going to be the thing that leads to the violence that the show's heading towards.
I think what seems to be absolutely central is this idea of like an intrinsic link between queerness and pedophilia, like exploitation of children. There's this idea, like you were talking about just then, with like the age of consent being a bit higher for gay people. And it all comes from this reproductive anxiety, almost, that like a 16-year-old having straight sex is fine, but a 16-year-old having gay sex or being exposed to the idea of gay sex is like preying on a child, like corrupting them, like somehow distorting them. And it all comes from, I guess, this fear of maybe like the not even strictly necessarily the parents of those children, but like people of that generation or people in charge of society who don't want their kids to be like, to not be like them. They want their kids to be replicas of themselves, to continue that, I guess, that lineage, or like just to continue this societal project, whatever's going on there. Like, it's the idea of just a class wanting to reproduce itself and keep doing that, which I guess homosexuality is in some way like a threat to, or like certainly being transgender is a huge threat to, as we're seeing kind of in terms of the massive wave of transphobia that's kind of being almost like funded on like a billionaire level. You know, I think this, I think RTD is kind of lasering in on that here, and maybe the hypocrisy of it. And just specifically, because that thing you said with the ages of consent being different is sort of the perfect illustration of it. It's this idea that I think we're going to see a lot with through Clive, that it's because of this desire to keep your kids straight that you get this idea that they must be protected from gayness in the way that they don't have to be protected from straightness. So, and in the way that makes gayness like become symbolized as like a form of sexual predation, even when it is not literally that. So I think RTD is I think that's probably going to be like the main sort of crux of the whole thing. I think possibly if Leo's going to get lynched, maybe he's going to get accused of being a paedophile, specifically because of the gay nature of what he's trying to discuss with George.
And that seems like what the episode 2 cliffhanger might lead to. Right.
Yeah, I think like discovering George in Leo's home, like that's like the first way to misinterpret that is to be like, oh my god, is Leo having some kind of affair with George? Is what's going on? You know, it's intimate in a way that's not appropriate. So it's like, what's going on there?
I can totally understand why George wants to go in Leo's house. You know, I feel like he's in a very straight house, and I can see why. Even as a teenager, it's just nice to be somewhere like alone, and he's doing something kind of. I completely get why George is doing that, but maybe I'm just totally unimaginative. I have absolutely zero idea how they can possibly explain this in a way where Clive doesn't like go completely psychotic on Leo and or George, and like the show ends. Like, I have no idea how things progress. Like the next episode isn't the finale. We have 3 more episodes. I don't know. Am I like, can I just not imagine what happens next? It's a hell of a cliffhanger.
I mean, like Leo gave Clive the spare key. So I mean, if George like spins it in some way, like, I mean, obviously it won't resolve peacefully, but like, there's probably an excuse that could be made that doesn't implicate Leo immediately. Like, it's just the house next door at the end of the day, and they have a key to it. He just wanted to get out. So, they could potentially explain it away, but obviously it won't. It won't go down a treat with Clive.
It's fascinating, and I think good evidence of what you're saying about the overall direction of the show and how much it's engaging with these sort of queer grooming, right-wing talking points. That when Clive gets himself a key to his neighbour's house and then just starts going into it without asking and doing stuff in his house. When Leo asks if he can have could I have the spare key to yours? Clive jokes, "You wish," right? Making a barely veiled comment about his sons. That's Clive's very first reaction to their lives becoming a little bit intertangled. Is Clive wants access to Leo's house because he's trying to get a job because of all these things, because maybe he feels like he should have it. And the very idea of giving Leo the same kind of trust that Leo's expected to give Clive is inherently absurd because he's got sons.
Yeah, Clive seems to feel entitled to have access to other people's space and other people's lives and stuff like that. It's like it's never even necessarily occurred to him that it might be weird to just go and just wander into Leo's house. And maybe he thought about it a bit and then suppressed it. But it cannot be reciprocated. It cannot be the other way around. Again, he is literally closed. I mean, he's closing his house off, but he's closed off in terms of his life as well, in a way that he doesn't afford other people. He doesn't let Leo be closed off in the same way.
And in the Spit and Polish, he shuts down the staff joking with each other as if it's his bar. I'm trying to work here, as if he's not in as an employee like them. He's got a right to tell them what they can and can't joke about in their own workplace. This entitlement all the way through, despite being, and I think this is interesting and possibly a direction to take the conversation, especially because of the class relationship between Leo and Clive, where Leo is, they're both paying mortgages, I imagine Clive is. But Leo is more financially successful in that he runs a business and he employs lots of people and he has 2 properties. And Leo positions himself as Clive's employer rather than his neighbour and uses that to sort of hit him throughout the show. That really... The Clive introduces him to friends as his gay neighbour and goes, "Oh, that's not a problem, is it?" And Leo says, "It is actually, and that's no way to talk to your employer." Really, really mean. Not wrong nor unjustified, but extremely mean. And that meanness runs through both of them and goes back and forth across these 2 episodes.
I found that it's just kind of, well, I guess the heartwarming thing is it spans both sexualities, but it's this corrosive sort of masculinity where they have to, there's no, how many male friend groups, maybe this is just a straight man thing, but when there's a friend group and there's the one designated and this is the one we shit on and even the guy who gets shit on is yep, that's me. And there's one guy they have to all it's like a little 2 minutes hate they all have to have. There's one guy that gets diminished in the friend group. I feel like this is such a man thing of tearing each other down rather than boosting each other up, or just as equally Leo and Clive could be whoa, that's awesome that you blah blah blah, not in those words, but they could big each other up. It's not like they couldn't do that, rhetorically. But all the little things of, even when they're doing each other a favor, they'll be cutting each other down. And Russell T Davies kind of said about Leo's like hamartia. Leo's arrogance sees that he constantly has to like kind of be putting Clive down. And Clive's, version of masculinity sees that he's constantly has to be putting Leo down. But I'm like, you guys could get along, basically. I really think they could, if one of them could just kind of show their belly a little bit. If one of them could just be the bigger man and kind of take something in stride and then do the slightly vulnerable thing of extending themselves out a bit, and they might get hurt. And I mean, I think Leo, this is probably what's get Leo killed in the end, but Leo's problem is he tries to do it both ways. He's doing like Oliver is saying, he's shitting on him, and he's, doing this kind of class-based thing of, mocking his like lower class status on him and kind of domineering him in that masculine way over his employment of him. But then Leo is also like trying to be nice to him. Like Leo is like, the fact he's employing him in the first place is a nice thing. He could have just ended, the first episode's kind of relationship stuff as it was. He didn't have to go back and extend that olive branch. I don't think you can have both ways. You can't be like dissing and, kind of brutalizing a guy like Clive and then also trying to be somewhat friendly with him as well. I think that's Leo's flaw, is trying to play it both ways. But I just wish both of them, like, can't boys be nice to each other? Why do they have to diminish each other so much? Like they both keep doing it and it doesn't make either of them happy, but they're both just like psychotically drawn to doing it again and again in both episodes. It makes me sad.
It's really interesting to me that Clive actually does have a go at being vulnerable. Because he does that weird thing of intruding on Leo's space and putting the key in and everything. And it turns out he's angling for work.
Yeah.
And so he has this really vulnerable moment where he leans in across the table and goes, if you happen to have any work going. And Leo shuts him down immediately without thinking about it, knowing that he does have work that needs doing. And David Morrissey literally leans backwards in his chair. He recesses into himself and pulls out and goes, oh no, yeah, it's fine. I didn't even think, it's not that big a deal. It's all fine. So Leo actually shuts down Clive's vulnerability. And it's only after he's able to dress him down. He dresses him down about, you invented queerness. You pushed us into a corner. You made this happen. He dresses him down about that, and that's such a dressing down. And then he pivots to the money. He says, actually, I want exact change. So he financializes their relationship. And then, then Clive goes back to get the money. He comes back, and it's only then, once he's sort of asserted his power in the relationship and asserted that actually he is the employer, it's only then that Leo goes, actually, I have got work for you. Now I'm in charge. I'm happy to do you this favor that you wanted from me before. And I'm only willing to do that now because we've measured dicks, pretty much.
Yeah, well, yeah, Leo seems to sort of feel a bit of like you said, it's sort of an olive branch when he offers Clive the job. And I think it's because Leo feels like a bit of pity, almost, like feels a bit sad for how much he's sort of like, for how kind of off balance their positions are, I guess, because even though like Clive is so bad at actually asking and being vulnerable, because when he asks about if there's any work, like that's come after a whole sequence of him being like a bit of an inappropriate sort of awkward dickhead again. It's like so when he finally kind of decides to open up and be nice, it's like he's so bad at that, but Leo can't just quite sort of look past and see that he's just bad at doing this. Like Leo kind of is still like very much has his guard raised. So I think the whole thing there, I think, because we've been talking about like how Leo and Clive could just get along if they could just see past each other's kind of, if they could just see the humanity in each other, I guess, and how like them occasionally being mean to each other is not actually necessarily strictly a symbol of like a fundamental incompatibility, but just them being kind of bad at this whole business of having feelings and stuff. I think if they could have more empathy for each other, then that would sort of resolve a lot of the differences between them. Because like you have to sort of, sometimes you you have to just put up with what people are like sometimes and recognise that they don't necessarily mean to be horrible. Like, even when Clive kind of casually says sort of like harsh things, it doesn't necessarily strictly come from like sincere venom. I think all the time, like, it's just how he's learned to behave. And I think Leo is sort of the same way. Like, his casual kind of like cattiness occasionally, sort of camp gay quipping and all sorts of stuff like that is not strictly from a sincere desire to wound or injure, but it's almost like a defense mechanism that both of them have in different ways.
There's that wonderful moment that I think sort of sums up the locking heads between the two of them, where they both get in their cars to go to the spit and polish, and Clive revs his engine, like, pulsating, and what's it for? And Leo sort of laughs at it. Deeply weird, very psychosexual. Your car is your penis, I guess. Which I guess also makes sense because at that point Clive is on the back foot and he is being employed and whatnot. So it's particularly important for him to get in his big car.
On the topic of Clive and these kind of awkward moments with Leo, what do we think is behind that sort of reaction he had when Leo tried to allude to the affair that Clive had? Like, oh, I'm the one who sleeps around? Really? What about you? And Clive just seems to not understand. Like, you might think that Clive would display, I don't know, consciousness of guilt or something like that, or sort of pick up on what's being alluded to there that someone else knows, but he just seems genuinely nonplussed. Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Like, what do you think's happening there?
I reckon, I just have a feeling Steph is wrong somehow. I feel like that story isn't quite correct, the caravan thing. Maybe I'm wrong there, but it was such a weird reaction. I feel like what we know of Clive's character, you'd expect him to get his back up and kind of be like hostile, like, what the fuck are you talking about? Or who told you that? And maybe he was just like trying to see if Leo would reveal more. But I don't know. I found it a really weird reaction by Clive to not... He didn't even seem offended. He seemed confused.
My suspicion there is that Steph's actually right, but Clive can't conceptualize his wife having told anyone.
Yeah.
That they had, you know, because he's so closed off and that's such a vulnerable thing, and he so would never have told anyone under any circumstances himself. That the idea of somebody else gossiping about it, it doesn't even really occur to him that the news has made it to his next door neighbour.
That would be more interesting, I think, than it just being like a lie. As much as, I mean, if it were a lie and false gossip, that could be used to make a point about how everyone just kind of jumps to conclusions, assumes the worst about Clive. But I think it is sort of more interesting in that kind of version you sort of suggested, where it's more him compartmentalizing it so much, where like he can't even sort of comprehend. Yeah, I'm sort of very curious to find out what's going on there.
There's I kind of have a through line away from Clive into something else about the show. I'm going to try and you can pull me back if we want to keep going Clive, but I'm going to attempt this little rowing here. So David Morrissey, something he said is the idea of physical relationships being superseded by the digital is very clear in the show. David Morrissey, what have you got to say about that? And he says, Russell, what he does brilliantly is intimate that there's a world in which, like we're saying, Leo and Clive could be friends, in which they connect, where they can agree to disagree. It almost happens. Clive becomes curious about what Leo is saying to him. He ends up in a club on Canal Street. Russell gives both men forks in their road. There are times when Clive is quite vulnerable in front of Leo. Leo cannot not goad him. Russell gives both men an opportunity to heal, to build bridges, to come together in some way. They just cannot do it. They poke away at each other regardless. Russell's script is, therefore exploring language as well as identity. And then he's asked this follow-up question. Is this also why Clive can't speak to his sons? And David Morrissey says it's got something to do with that. He does try. There's something about our muscle memory now that is about taking the piss, to ridicule, to block. Even George, the younger son, blocks conversation. They're all in this routine and they can't get out of it. No emotion. The television is on and everyone's on their telephone. How do we look each other in the eye, begin to have a conversation, let alone ask for help in this environment? It is not unusual, I think. The piece, Tiptoe, is about how we lost our way. There's something about this shaming, goading, and inability to put the brakes on that explodes in a group. The frenzy of it is really dangerous. Where I want to go with there is the show's really about phones, isn't it? There's a lot here that's about phones. I'll bring in some Russell quotes later where he basically says that. But before that, what do we think of the very phone-heavy sex/gore montage that is towards the end of episode 1? Or should I say masturbation/gore? Yeah.
Well, I thought it was fabulous. The choice of song was perfect, and it's exactly the sort of kind of garish, weird, awesome sort of insanity that I would like to see out of television. I think it was like funny, cool, kind of dark, gross in the way. I think if it wasn't for the bits of Clive watching all those watch people die in real life videos, then it wouldn't be as interesting. It's because you got that contrast between all the people in in both houses kind of indulging themselves in their own way, and you get that sheer contrast with Clive. That's kind of what makes it so interesting. It is also interesting, of course, to see how within Clive's family, each member kind of retreats into their own private world, and they're kind of very separated from each other. They've got their own secrets, pretty much. But yeah, no, I think that was a very sort of funny sequence, just seeing the sheer sort of explicitness of what they all get up to.
There's a much less interesting version of that montage where everyone retreats into their own space and does a different thing on the internet. You know, everyone does something very different to everyone else. One person reads fan fiction, one person records a podcast. I don't know. It's what gets me is that it's all sex. Everyone is masturbating except for Clyde, which means he is, right? Because everyone else is masturbating, that means that what Clive is doing is also masturbating, right? That's the implication.
Yeah.
That violence and conspiracy theories and the hyper-attentional hate algorithm that Clive is absorbing is the same thing as masturbation in some way. And obviously, you know, too obvious not to do, the gunshot lines up with everybody orgasming. Yeah. Death itself being, and that, you know, signals to where the series is going. Death itself is this climactic release of this digital self-indulgence. And the way the music cuts out in different ways for each of them.
Yeah.
So it cuts out first to introduce the audiobook that the David Morrissey's wife is listening to set up this thing that male sexuality is this particular thing, and the show's particularly interested in male sexuality, so it differentiates her sexuality slightly from the others. And then it cuts out again, so you hear the screaming and the explosions and the horrors on Twitter. I
just want to say how slightly traumatized I am from the show, kind of introducing concepts like gooning and bara and stuff like that on the British television. It's like, oh my god. I sort of love that it's getting kind of that into the weeds with it. But wow, it's just slightly like secondhand embarrassment.
You know, it's funny, unlike his other shows on Doctor Who, we can rightfully go, Russell's lost it and he's lost his touch, and you know, he used to have his finger on the pulse and the finger's no longer on the pulse. But then when he does something like the gore masturbation thing, it's like that is so well observed, and it's such an interesting point of contrast and connection, like Oliver illustrated. Like, he is so good at this type of show. I just hope he keeps doing these forever.
The thing you mentioned in the quote about blocking, how George blocks people, how Leo gets blocked by the guy he's trying to hook up with, is particularly interesting because were it a digital relationship, Clive and Leo would probably have blocked each other at some point. And it's the fact it's not a phone-mediated relationship, the fact that they are physical neighbours, makes that kind of distance impossible. They can't actually block one another in the way that they could if they were online. Do you know Sam Watts, who did the music for this, previously did the Traitors theme tune.
Really?
And before that, the Sarah Jane Adventures.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the Traitors theme sounds almost identical to the Sarah Jane Adventures theme. Play VT.
When we were just talking about the masturbating gore montage, probably my favorite bit of music, I mean, obviously that's a licensed song, Unholy, but there's a bit of Sam Watts like distorted guitar stuff that leads up to the song starting that I thought was really cool. But like the main music that runs through the show, like that disembodied vocals theme. What do we think of it?
Temu Murray Gold. It's kind of how it comes off to me. It feels like it's kind of trying to imitate what we've had in previous RTD shows a little bit. And anyway, it's not bad, but I can't say I super care for it particularly.
I like the energy of it. I think it does what it needs to in creating the sort of emotional momentum through the show. So as like a dramatic percussion, I think it works, but it doesn't have all of the Murray Gold power and melody to it. I'm not going to be singing these songs in my head like I still am the Years and Years music.
Yeah.
There was a kind of, I think, attempt at, like classic Murray Gold silly music when, in the second episode where Leo invites, the guy over for a hookup, and which doesn't end up happening. But there was like, Sam Watts was doing kind of like silly, playful music there. But most of the music is that disembodied theme, but it's not like the same bit of music. Like he keeps doing new arrangements of it, but most of what we get is that. Yeah, I don't dislike it, but I agree. It's not that memorable yet. maybe it gets better.
Yeah, I'm curious about how the music will change as the show becomes more of a thriller, like as the stakes get higher and higher, because I think a lot of the sort of like jocular, casual, okay, here's just some stuff going on, music is sort of whatever, but you sort of have to change genres a bit once people start getting murdered. So, you know, I'm interested to see that. Maybe we'll go in a more electronic direction.
I did think, and this is my subtle segue to talking about the scene with Curtis, the dinner party. My subtle segue is saying that we're going to talk about that scene now. I thought in that specific scene, although that worked for me great, the music was a little overbearing in a very Murray Gold way, but it was just a little bit too much.
Was that the Billie Eilish I Love You playing in the background as well when they were like having that talk about we don't love each other anymore?
Might well be.
Yeah. That was interesting. I love that backstory though. I think that's so interesting, that relationship.
Yeah, that whole... You get this across, it's in Queer as Folk and it's in Cucumber, and it's in all RTD stuff, and it's a big focus of Doctor Who, obviously, the most recent run. That idea that having children is sort of reserved for straight relationships, and particularly brutal for Leo in this case, because they are fostering, which Leo and Curtis could have done at any point.
Yeah.
So it's not the biological thing. It's not the actual reproductive thing. It's something personal, something cultural, something to do with the expectations of gay relationships versus straight ones. But the fact that his partner leaves him and gets together with a woman, and they almost immediately decide to foster children. This devastating personal thing, and with all these connections to the broader expectations of queer life.
Yeah, I think Leo ends up having all these different things he's reading into it. Like he feels like that it has all these implications potentially for him, about him. Like he's asking himself, was it something wrong with me? Like does Curtis feel he's a better person now that he's left me? Like what kind of reasons are there that Curtis wouldn't do this with me? And like there's like a wealth, an ocean of different possibilities. Like it could be to do with like homophobia, or it could be to do with, or it could be like much more personal and stuff to do with like who Leo is as a person. So he's like, and without a true answer, like Leo is just left kind of wallowing in all these like horrible, self-critical, doubtful possibilities for what could have been wrong. So he's just kind of struggling with all of those sort of crashing in at once. So I think it's inherently difficult, I think, to see someone leave you and then become a different person, and maybe a more self-actualized person in your absence. You know, you end up asking yourself all kinds of questions about like what was happening with me that they couldn't have done that with me.
Yeah.
So it's like it's just I guess the worst position for him to be in, really. I sort of the bit in that scene that actually, hang on before I do that. There's one line in that scene that Leo has. I'm kind of curious. Like, is it drawn from RTD's own experience? Because even though it's not the same situation as the one RTD was in, when Leo talks about how stupid it feels eating on his own now, and how he's just like a tube that eats and shits, I feel like that could very much be RTD talking about life after his own partner passed away. Like, it feels like an observation drawn from that real experience of suddenly being on your own, and that reality just feels like a very raw thing. I thought that was really, 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 really nicely observed.
Yeah, I think that scene where they leave the dinner party and go into the kitchen, that feels very spiritual to me, very and particularly spiritual because it's around an actual kitchen sink, but they have this conversation in this like in between place, and they're talking around the issue itself, and Leo, not able to really talk about the thing itself, starts talking about how there's objects moving in his house, in the way that they would be if you were being haunted, right? And although we know that this is an actual thing, at least by the end of the episode, we know that these objects are moving because somebody is moving them. From Curtis's point of view, it's a haunting, right? It's Leo expecting there to be another person in his house who isn't there anymore. It's like a ghostly presence, which makes sense of Curtis sort of cutting off the story to say, I'm gone, actually. I've left. I'm gone. Which, the way he phrases it, could just as much be somebody talking from beyond the veil. I thought that scene was just incredible.
Yeah, really, that specific line, like, I've gone, love, I've left you, I've gone.
Yeah.
That is where, just like how you say it, like, it transcends being what it's specifically about and becomes almost this ghostly spiritual thing. Like, it's so delicate. And I love, like, sort of the emotional intelligence of Curtis there, all of a sudden, in a way. Like, in this really kind of like this merciful way, he kind of says that as gently as he can, because he seems to think Leo is genuinely going insane and thinks he's being haunted, even though we know, obviously, he's not. Yeah, it is like a stark moment of, I guess, the residual love there, even if it's not like romantic love anymore. It's very moving.
And the fact that the two women can hear them through the walls. Which is all the way through the show, right? All the way through the show, people are hearing each other through walls. But none of these moments, none of these conversations are really private. And, yeah.
That reminds me. One of those women is Steph. There's something we haven't talked about yet. Does anyone else want to introduce this?
Steph is a racist transphobe. Possibly. Dial both of those statements back 10%.
Yeah, it hasn't. The gender critical aspect hasn't quite come up yet, so I'm sure it's going to. But in interviews around the show and kind of like discussions of it, like kind of pre-airing reviews and things, and also press kit stuff, there's been discussion of how like Steph is like a gender critical character that RTD wrote because he has gender critical friends in real life. And in real life, there's like interview quotations and stuff I don't have in front of me here, but like I think he's sort of presenting this idea that you can be friends with these people and we all are on the same side in the end. Like this, if you just talk in real life and talk it out and, it's all happy clappy, it's certainly interesting.
The Guardian quote, this is, because I really wish, imagine if we'd seen these episodes and Steph without this paratext, but we have this paratext.
Yeah.
It colors everything. So the big one is this Guardian quote Gig's alluding to, where Russell says regarding Steph being gender critical, I wanted all sorts of voices in there. I've got friends who are gender critical. It's only online you end up screaming and shouting and being attacked by them. In real life, you have a chat and we all kind of sigh and put up with each other. That's how the world works. It's actually how the world is ceasing to work. Bro, like he does so much, and then gender critical friends. This show is such a weird, like, kind of self-loathing thing where there's a lot of stuff with Leo, which is clearly Russell working through some, well, maybe not self-loathing, but certainly self-critique. But I feel like Steph as a character I think is interesting. I think she's really well acted. I really love how she does the dialogue, that actress. I think she really makes it come alive and feel very organic. But for such an ideological show and like a show that, it's very openly political and it's very clearly Russell's own politics. It's almost a polemic, it's very openly political. So for him to have a gender critical character and her be kind of positively characterized and kind of, approved of by our lead character, and then Russell kind of also approving in the press. That's a very political statement to make, along with the other political statements. And I think it's a dodgy, well, I think it's a bad political statement, for many reasons. And I think it clangs against a lot of the rest of what the show is doing. And I think he's kind of, I think, and it's funny because Melba is part of this, saying, these women have a right to be angry. But a lot of the Melba characters kind of drawing the battle lines, right? Like, another one of the funniest moments of the show to me, episode 2, where George is brought up and like Clive says he's 16 and Melba goes like, that's legal. Which is like, why are you randomly escalating things? But, Melba is very much drawing the battle lines, like in the huge dialogue in the first episode between, there are the Trump emboldened sexists, racists, transphobes and whatnots, and there are the people who are not that, us queer people and whatnot, and we are being drawn into more and more conflict with each other. And so I think, that Guardian article goes on to say, as terrifying violence looms towards the end of the series, Stephanie and Z end up on the same side. I think Russell, and I want to know what you two think, I think he is misidentifying what exactly the gender critical side is in reality and what pole it actually ends up aligning with. What do you two think?
I think RTD is sort of trying to litigate his real life position, which is that he has trans friends and he has transphobic friends, and he wants to have his cake and eat it too, basically, and just say, well, it's fine because I'm friends with them both. Therefore, I don't have to sort of navigate this in any way. We can just mash it all together and we'll all just agree to disagree. And we won't really interrogate the existential questions there. I think the nature of having, sort of gender critical people in your orbit is that you will kind of, people who you're being friendly with, you'll kind of internalize their assessment of like why they are the way they are, why they think like that, what they present as their politics to you. And a kind of some interesting context here is that the actor Elizabeth Barrington, who plays Stephanie, has an interview in the Channel 4 press kit for the show where she describes like why her character is gender critical in her opinion, basically. I think so what she says, because she works in social services, right? And what she says is, I think she is gender critical, talking about Steph here, and that may be a point of view fed by the violence and domestic violence and vulnerability she's seen exploited against cis women and girls. That's fed where she is. She's fearful around that, but she's not a closed book. She can go to Leo's bar and see all the beautiful folk who are there, and she's open. She might be a bit stuck, but only because the conversations are a bit stuck, aren't they? How can you love people and have a foot in both camps? So, and she sort of goes on, which I think that sort of expresses how RTD is sort of coming at it. This idea that she's gender critical because she's worked with abused women and she just has lots of compassion and empathy for women. And I think that's a bit, it's a very generous assessment of kind of where kind of GC politics come from. I don't know if it's entirely accurate, to be honest with you. I think, I think it aligns much more with this idea of I think if you look at the pipelines that sort of people in the gender critical sphere kind of go on in real life, if you look at the sort of people that like, I don't know, Posey Parker surrounds herself with, or you look at the sort of politics that Graham Linehan or like Gareth Roberts have sort of polarized themselves into having when it comes to other things like, I don't know, like really hoping Israel wins Eurovision, stuff like that. I think you can kind of see how it's not this thing by itself. I don't think it is a politics that arises from compassion. I think it's one that arises from disgust and paranoia and sort of anxiety about like sort of a very sort of, again, a sort of reproductive anxiety and anxiety about like what society is going to look like and what people around you look like, and just looking at them and going, I think that is why, I think that's more where it comes from than this sort of like, well, I'm just really worried about women. Okay. I think that's like the bad faith version that GC sort of present to the world. That's what they say. Like, I just want to protect women. I'm just very scared about women and the violence that women will suffer from these imposter women. But it's like, it's sort of bullshit. Like it doesn't really come from that. Like it's just, I think he's just kind of swallowed the Kool-Aid a little bit when it comes to them.
I think I'm a little more sympathetic to the show itself. I think the thing Russell says about sighing and shaking your head and getting on with it is interesting, and that's exactly what Leo does at the end of that scene with Steph. Like he literally shakes his head and goes, puff. But I think there's a few details that make this sympathetic for me. One of which is that Steph's reasoning doesn't make any sense. You invented self-ID, and therefore it's your fault that somebody's age isn't properly recorded. Doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that's meant to... Certainly it doesn't scan as compelling in the way that Leo's big diatribe against enforced heteronormativity does read as compelling. Her argument doesn't really come across in that way, which might just be because the real world argument doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think also in the show it is framed such that it doesn't make that much sense. And I think there's also... I think when you place that next to the... And Melba's confusing on her own terms, but when you place that next to Melba, whose concern isn't, she doesn't say, this is annoying, or she doesn't make this sort of specious nonsense argument. She makes a really clear-headed, really convincing case that actually trans people are on the front line of a war and in harm's way right now. That ends up coming across much louder in the show than Steph's position, even if Melba has that weird little line that I can't really pass, where she says that women are right to be angry.
Yeah.
That line... I'm sort of my guess as to what it's going for is not necessarily that Melba agrees with the anger about trans people, but that she agrees with women being angry in a general sense. Like the anger that women have can come from multiple sources. Like it may be that they are angry about many different things, and that anger is getting channeled into this kind of fury towards trans people and these paranoias and kind of conspiracies and again like contempt and disgust for trans people. So I think it may be that she sympathises with the anger, but not strictly necessarily the outlet for that anger. If you see what I mean? Like I think it's a fairish thing to say that like the female anger is sort of like understandable.
And I think that reading does make sense in light of the fact that Leo is sort of generalized misogynist. Not in any direct or violent way, but it's clear in lots of small details that he doesn't think about women that much, and he doesn't think about women's issues, and he thinks they're a little, he's maybe dismissive. The way that Leo and Melba's relationship is set up is fascinating from that point of view. That moment where Melba explodes at the drag queen, Leo has to escort her out, and then he sticks his head back round the door and laughs at the drag queen's joke. Really interesting that I guess he sort of recognises where Melba's coming from and agrees intellectually with some of the frustrations, but is emotionally more comfortable with sitting in the middle and laughing at both sides and not really committing to fighting the war, as Melba puts it.
Yeah, I guess, we've talked about Leo kind of being an analogue in some ways to RTD and his position in some ways. I think maybe part of it is drawn from that, this feeling of being slightly in the middle. Like, even though RTD is writing polemic here, I think if we think about it in terms of his own life, maybe part of this idea of grappling with his position in the world as kind of the world changes around him is this idea of, I'm sort of talking around it here, but like with RTD and many other kind of former Doctor Who writers, there is this sort of like centrist sphere that they will kind of hover around. And like in Years and Years, you have that amazing horseshoe theory line where like if you go too far left, you end up being far right. That was in Years and Years as well. I think this idea of being politically sort of not quite fully aligned is like a recurring theme. I think, with I guess maybe not a recurring theme, but like something that looms or lurks one way or the other in a lot of writing. Maybe not just by RTD, but like by loads of people. I think so. I'm sort of trying to grapple with that position of not being fully committed to the radical kind of confrontational position, but also feeling increasing pressure, like from the other direction, like feeling like if you don't join the war, it might be your ass on the fire next.
There's that little through line, in episode 2, where one of the other business owners, a woman who owns a lesbian bar, talks about customers harassing staff because a performer has a Star of David in a collage in a backdrop or on a poster or something, which landed in a sort of similar way for me, where it's sort of, I guess, airing the point of view. But then the actual sort of end point of that conversation is the owner of this bar is going, "What the hell's going on? This is crazy." And Leo sort of goes, "Yeah, it's tomatoes." I think you see a similar thing with Melba, where Steph's point of view is given an airing, it's given some time, but Melba's point of view is we are literally under attack, and that's the show's point of view as well. I think pretty clearly that both sides, but some people are victims of violence right now. And it seems to me that's what the show is going to focus more on.
I think with that sort of assaulting the lesbians assaulting the lesbian bar staff at the lesbian bar because of a lesbian with a Jewish symbol, that whole bit, I think RTD's trying to go on this sort of thing of like, why are we attacking each other when things are getting so serious? How, and Leo kind of smugly, after that scene, he sort of exits. I always said the left would eat itself, and here we are. Haha! Look at how sort of comically tragic we are, kind of going after each other for these frivolous things. I have a slight problem with that scene. Specifically, the detail that, like you kind of described there, just putting a Star of David next to Spider-Man and a TARDIS is enough to have people assaulting the bar staff on accusations of being Zionist. I think that is a distortion of reality. I think that borders on a smear, to be honest with you. I think it's kind of willfully playing up something that, I mean, it just... There's another factor here, because it relates to something RTD said about the shows or before it aired. But just before I get to that, I think there is something a bit alarming to me about having this whole thesis about the world is going back into this dark age of bigotry and violence and institutional oppression and kind of oppression of minorities, kind of stuff like that. And just kind of skipping over the elephant in the room, which is that right now there is this overwhelming racist push against anyone who is even slightly suggestive of Asia or Africa in the UK. We've got mainstream political parties running on this concept of doing essentially an ethnic purge of the country. But this is a transatlantic phenomenon. You've got it happening in the West, you've got it happening in Europe. And it is strange to me that RTD, I feel, in this case, is almost glossing over that in favour of situations like this one that he's sort of written to the show, which I think is, in my opinion, kind of confabulated. I think when you get people protesting an establishment or performer for being Zionist, it's not going to be because they have a Star of David on their poster. It'll be maybe because they have an Israel flag on their poster. Or maybe they've said I stand with Israel at some point, something like that. Like I think the idea that if they just see if they just see a Star of David, they'll stop beating you up. That seems to me like a deliberate exaggeration, like a willful exaggeration of the situation, to kind of portray people who care about Palestine as like, illiterate, racist, and of course violent. Like, it just seems to be feeding into this really fucked up narrative where, like, the people who are actually being kind of pogromed and, like, stigmatized in all the media, that just kind of is sort of blanked and is invisible, not really happening. And the real victims are these kind of lesbian bar staff that we've just made up in our heads, right? I don't like that. It feels like this weird preference for, like, a slightly more palatable form of victimhood over the real and urgent one. You see what I mean? Like, I don't want to get my soapbox, but like, I just sort of internally I screamed at that, and it's like, what the fuck are you on about? And it reminded me of what Arsky said in an interview before this, when he was talking about it, and how kind of the oppression towards queer people he sees coming back also applies to other minorities. And the words he used were, a Jew could have written this. And I think it was something like, if this was about Jews, people would be saying it was too late, which was an allusion to, I think, the recent sort of incident in like Golders Green, where 2 Jewish people were stabbed by this person who was like a kind of a psychiatric patient who'd been in and out of like the legal system for like 20 years. And earlier that same morning, he'd also stabbed his flatmate, who was a Muslim. And this incident got sort of picked up in the media as sort of evidence of like this sort of Iran-linked kind of wave of anti-Semitic terrorism or something that's happening. And it's just, I feel like there's something fucked up about sort of playing that up hugely and just not, and sort of refusing to see the massive, like overwhelmingly huge racism in terms of Islamophobia, the Middle East, like black people, like it just seems to me like there is like a concrete thing that RTD doesn't quite want to face up to. And maybe because of the spheres he travels in, the people he kind of in his circle, like he feels like this other thing is like more important or like more real, to the point where he can sort of smear it and kind of portray it in this distorted way. I didn't like that at all, basically. And I've ranted about it for 5 minutes. You get the impression.
I don't think it's completely implausible that something that could be slightly fudged as the lesbian bar staff thing could occur. Like, I think that is an exaggeration of a thing that has happened maybe a few times. You know, I'm pretty in leftist circles in London. Sometimes people are dumbasses. But to focus so much on that, like Leo says, tomatoes, when the week this is airing, the openly fascist far-right British party are rioting on the premise that the British police force are anti-white, that the far-right fascist party in Britain is doing hits on the Conservative Party for saying Black Lives Matter 10 years ago. Especially the week that this series is airing, the far-right fascist violent racism in the UK is exploding. And in a couple of years, there will be a fascist British government, more so perhaps than the Labour Party. And that the show chooses to make Clive's racism, which gets touched on a couple of times, this sort of, it's a little bit more complicated than you thought. Or actually, there's more to it than just racism. When he says stop the boats, he's thought about it a bit and he knows what he's talking about. And at the same time, to tell this story about the bar staff, I think it's an odd combination of choices. Clive's racism being sort of well thought out particularly weirded me. Do you know the bit I'm talking about there?
Do you mean the bit where he talks about Aruba having that different voltage and stuff?
Yes.
I do wonder how much of the stuff he says, because I feel like sometimes he says stuff and we're meant to think, oh, he just read that online, that's bullshit. Like maybe the stuff about the FBI destroying, I don't know.
Yes, maybe that was a weird
I don't know if the voltage stuff is like actually like a physical, like a literal fact, and that's supposed to be a point where we think, oh, Clive isn't as racist as we thought. Like, okay, maybe it is. Like, that's kind of the read I took on it initially. I'm not 100% either way, though.
I think it's trying to complicate. He's not just racist. It's trying to complicate it. And but not in a way that necessarily takes away. He says in the first episode, he says, yeah, running a business like that might be hard, but you don't have to compete with maritime law. The point being, small boats, right? He's doing a small boats bit. And the climax of that scene is Leah says, what's that got to do with maritime law? And Clive says, well, we're an island. And that phrasing specifically, we're an island. Again, that keys into the masculinity stuff. Everybody is by themselves. No one can communicate. But at the same time, it's very, very 2026 British racism. We are an island. We are separate from these people. And people coming here is violence against me, actually.
The stuff stoking all of this, to circle back to the phones. Actually, no, before we do, a Jew could have written this. Russell didn't say that once. He said that a few times. And the funniest version of it was at the BFI, because he kept going, where he was talking about, extreme alienation. It's a crisis happening day after day, and it's anyone. Everyone's being weaponized against each other. You could make a Jewish version of this drama. You could make a disabled version of this drama. Women could make this drama. I see straight white men who could make this drama feeling marginalized. It's the temperature of the dialogue and the argument and the pitch of it, all driven by our phones. That's alarming me greatly. I'd love to see a straight version of Tip. Who's the Clive? Like if the equivalent, if like Leo is the straight guy in like the straight version of Tiptoe, who is the Clive analog? I wonder.
It could be another straight guy who's just like got beef with him for some other completely random reason.
Yeah, I guess you could do like a leftist straight guy and a like a chud right guy.
Yeah,
chud straight guy, I guess.
You could play up the class differences again. I mean, there's a bit about Leo and Clive already, isn't there?
His landlord.
Maybe someone should make it. Another country can remake Tiptoe as a straight drama. The phones thing.
Straight Tiptoe.
Yeah. The phones thing. Russell's quite unusually blunt that this is what the show's about. In some interviews, so in different ones, he's said stuff like, "There's a moment in Queer as Folk where a phone gets thrown in the river, and Russell's characterizing as, that was my reaction to the first modern media. Now we've got this constant online scroll, which is literally being monetized and weaponized against us very clearly. It goes beyond left wing and right wing now. We stand here in the dirt, wondering which government to vote in. But actually above us, the tech barons are ruling supreme. No taxes, no laws, no constraints, no power to stop them in any shape or form. You want to alter your algorithm online? Tough. It's got you for life. And we're sending 10-year-olds into this world. It's a terrible world. It needs to stop. Elsewhere, I saw Doctor Who fans having an issue with this one the other day. He talks up, Twitter is a hate site. You go to a cooking site, you get recipes. You go to Twitter, you get hate. And then, did you see recently... some people were mad that maybe Doctor Who does less on Twitter now or something because Russell is like, Twitter is bad and no one should be interacting with Twitter. Reading from the Huffington Post UK, Russell is similarly critical of X, the platform once known as Twitter, which he's not posted on since 2021, branding it a hate site. He goes on to share that he's recently run into some, quote, very big problems, unquote, in his work at the BBC, having, quote, refused to be part of any press release that went on Twitter, unquote. Quote again. I said I'm taking my name off anything that goes on Twitter. There is no way a publicly funded corporation should be posting on a hate site. And it is a hate site now. It's run by one man with an aim to increase hatred, and all the safeguards have been taken off and public bodies still post on it. It should stop immediately. In fact, we should sue those public bodies. We pay for the BBC, we pay for Channel 4 as well, and they're public bodies. They should absolutely stop posting on a site that is not a public forum, but it is a hate site. That's Russell to the Huffington Post in May 2026.
Yeah.
I go on Twitter every day. I love Twitter. I hate and love Twitter, but I don't really disagree with him. It is kind of algorithmically, I think, driven to what he's talking about. I'm on Blue Sky as well, and it's so boring. Nothing happens. Nothing happens on there.
There's no Nazis.
Yeah, that's the upside. There's no anything.
There's no Palestinians either. It does feel like Blue Sky is sort of where people go to run away from things like the genocide and stuff like that. Like it's. I think I think there's a degree of like to be able to flee X.com to any other alternative on the basis of like the owner being a Nazi and filling it with Nazi swill. I think there's a degree of you need to have the freedom to be able to do that, and lots of people don't. I think lots of people are relying on the platform that X offers for like access to the outside world. Like they're looking for crowdfund support. Like they can't do that on Blue Sky with all the sort of Tumblr like exiles and stuff like that. Like it just doesn't work. So no. It's really stratified in a very interesting way.
Leo is definitely on Blue Sky, and there's that moment talking with Melba where she says, you know, you're on the front line, you've got trans bar staff, you know, you need to be thinking about this. And Leo's response is, oh, I love my staff, which is great, because what he's saying there is, I don't really want to have to fight for them.
Yeah.
I don't really want to have to do this. I'm tired, I'm old. I would rather not think about any of this, which is also his reaction to Steph. I don't really want to get involved. Blue Sky Man.
Just funny, stupid tangent about social media sites that Leo's on. Did you see those adverts on Reddit, which were like fictitious Reddit posts that Leo had written about Clive and the situation?
No, what?
There have been ads for Tiptoe on Reddit in that format, like screen caps of these fictitious.
That's great.
Reddit posts that the various characters are making. I just thought that was funny. There is sort of a gay contingent on Reddit, so you know it's not impossible at all.
Yeah. Russell, you might have seen this bit, which I think is hilarious. So this is in that interview in France. He did it. He's talking about, I'm evangelical about we should turn off the phones for everyone under 16. Chuck them out. And it goes on, and the audience asks him a separate question about the future and hope and whatnot. And Russell says, "I'm not particularly full of hope."
What's something that gives you hope?
Well, the next generation always gives you hope. I used to give that answer. Now they've all been radicalized into bastards. So that's quite hard. I really used to think the children are the future, so to speak. And now you see what those forces are doing to them. I'm not particularly full of hope, and I'm not. And I really am glad to be quite old, because I've had the best out of the world, and God help us where we're going. I mean, I just think we'll have to be clever and unite and survive, and that we have great hearts, great beating hearts. I think we're so much better individually than we are in a political sphere than we are online. It's like, turn it off. It's like, when did the world start going mad? Oh, strangely, it was round about. How did those two things happen at the same time? I know I can be an old man now. I literally think this is poison and is destroying us. And every science fiction show always does an episode where someone gets telepathic powers and they can read other people's thoughts. And the plot is always the same. They go mad. Now, we're all reading each other's thoughts, not even our telepathic real thoughts, but our typed thoughts. Our typed thoughts were such a different thing to our real thoughts, and we're falling into a trap of believing this. So that's my hope, is turn that off. Turn it off for everyone always, and we might have hope. I really mean that.
Yeah. Like, I think there's kind of a, I actually don't like when boomers or, Gen X are like, just put hope in the young people, man. Because it is like an abdication, like Leo is doing of, well, no, you're still around. And you're more powerful than young people. So you don't get to like say, and you amazing young people get to solve global warming. No, you get to solve it because you're still older and more powerful. And yeah, I really hate that. I think it's a very weak thing that older people do, is abdicate to the young. So hell yeah, like say fuck the young. Go for it. Some generational conflict.
I really enjoy part of the whole breakout, getting Z out of her housing. I like that this is clearly the first time Leo's seen a house share bedroom, like the normal way young people live these days, and is like horrified by it.
Yeah.
He says, "This is a box. What is this?" And then his response to that, although it's actually earlier, isn't that he takes Z in himself to his massive terrace house with, I would imagine, 2 spare bedrooms by the size of it. That's not what he does. He goes, oh, someone else has a spare room. And we know from the flash forwards that by the end of the series, Z is at least in his house, I imagine.
Yeah.
Actually living there. But he sees how, is it Judy? She says, this is what we did to them.
Yeah, Judy.
And the way that Leo sees that and recognizes it as a horror and, wow, we fucked up the kids, which is something I tend to, maybe not as strongly as RTD, but I do tend to think, yeah, you did, you fucked up the kids. But then he doesn't actually use the resources he has to help out. That's fascinating to me. The recognition of having screwed everyone over, but also, I don't really want to share my house, so I'm not going to.
I think it's also just wrong. Like Melba points out, you're not actually that safe just because you're old. Like they're not just coming for the young queer people, you know, they're coming for all of you. So you don't, I think partially maybe it's a fear-based thing to like act like you're out of it, but they're really not. It's a cross-generational thing.
I guess the word is like learned helplessness, isn't it? Like that's what suffuses that whole attitude of like, oh well, you know, there's nothing we can do now. Let's just hope things go well. You know, pillar of hope. Let's just leave it to the youth. It's like this deliberate. I think just people get so used to being helpless that they kind of start to make justifications for it and sort of arguments for remaining that way and not trying to change things because change seems impossible. So that's where that mindset sort of comes from. And I guess in Leo's case, it's like, even though, you know, as we've said, he could physically help her, kind of provide his own resources, but he can't conceive of changing his own life in that way. I guess because he's so set in his ways, he doesn't want to put himself out there.
And we know, of course, you know, he's not going to be safe. He is going to get got.
Yeah.
On the just to jump back very quickly, very slightly, to the idea that you brought up, RTD says about the techno barons who control our information space. I think that little scene about Elon Musk and Tesla is super interesting.
Yeah.
Because I can't really pass what Clive is saying.
Yeah.
He says the FBI burnt all Tesla's papers, and then Elon Musk named his company Tesla. Coincidence? And I don't really know what that means. And that's a great way of writing Twitter-brained conspiracy nonsense. Because clearly, whatever that is, it's from Elon Musk. It's from his platform. But it's not actually clear what he's saying. Is he saying that Elon Musk is Tesla? What's going on? What's he talking about?
I think the point is that he's saying essentially nothing, but just the fact of an implied connection of some form, opening the possibility that they'd be connected in some way, is meaningful in itself. Because I think that's how a lot of this QAnon stuff kind of works. It's free association. As long as you can draw some tangential connection between like this letter, this word, or this symbol, this picture, this person, this place, then that means there is evidence of a web, even if the meaning of that web is not like explicit. Like, as long as there is some sort of tangential link you can draw, then that is a sign that something is happening. And the fact that you don't identify what you think that something is kind of the point. Because if you don't do that, then it can be anything. It can be the biggest, craziest thing imaginable. And like the less you say about it, the bigger it gets in your head. You can imagine that the most insane conspiracy is happening as long as you don't get specific about what you think is actually happening.
And that's I think Clive's doing the same thing there, projecting onto a blank slate where he catches Leo says, he's got 2 kids, which very subtly reveals to Clive that Leo has talked about George, his 16-year-old son, in a private conversation, which has 100 innocent explanations, even if the actual explanation isn't actually that innocent. But expecting Leo to be a groomer because he's on Twitter so much, because he has this ideology, he expects Leo to be a groomer. He is looking out for that connection, and so when he sees that link, he projects everything onto it straight away. All the misinformation and homophobia he sees online, he projects onto the blank slate of that little misplaced word.
I think it also connects to what we talked about earlier with Clive, that entitlement to other people's space, but not allowing other people to see into his little world. So the fact that they've talked about his family in private at all is like overstepping the boundary. Like, what the fuck? You're not allowed to talk about me. You're not allowed to think about me without my permission. How dare you? Yeah, and then of course you add that to the fact that they are queer people. And you have this kind of like looming kind of paranoia about like ambient gay perversion, you're infecting my innocent child and my little baby. Then those two things kind of like combine.
I do think it's interesting that I think the only time we see Clive by himself, that might not be right, but certainly one of the few times we see Clive by himself is when he's on the internet, when he's doomscrolling acts of horrible violence. That's the only moment of like proper interiority, like direct interiority, the audience is allowed. Everything else we have to interpret by what he does and doesn't say, to other people and in conversations with other people. And it's almost as if the doom scrolling, the violence is that's the only thing we know about his interior life. That's the motivating thing, and that's the core that RTD's interested in. This addiction to horrors.
Yeah.
The crossed wires in your brain that thinks death is sex.
Yeah, I mean, for all we know, that's all he does whenever he's alone. Like, he'd be constantly scrolling Twitter for videos of people getting their heads blown off.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that masculinity thing I think we talked about earlier, where I think Morrissey maybe kind of alluded it into one of those quotes. This idea that violence is an acceptable like expression of, I don't know, emotion or something it's something that it's okay to be interested in. But also, I think it also comes from the fact that, in a way, I think just in general, an obsession with violence or true crime and murder and stuff is sort of a way, it's like an outlet for, I think, the violence that people feel is sort of kind of intangibly, psychically happening, like, all around them. I think it's like underneath, like, the polite veneer of society, there is always a fundamental layer of violence that's not being communicated. Like, there's a threat of violence, there's kind of suppressed, hidden violence. Like, it's happening there on a basic level. Like, there's the constant, like, there's the stick and the carrot as well. And I think that sort of the violent foundations of kind of the society that we live in kind of they poke out occasionally, and I think people feel them in a non-literal sort of abstract way. And I think that kind of feeds itself into people's fascination with the dark side, the bit that is suppressed. So the stuff that you don't see on the news, the horrible, the killings, the execution videos, even just the accidents, people accidentally getting blown up in a factory. Just this desire to see past the contained sort of surface level of life and sort of see like the horrible gore underneath, I think is like this desire. It just becomes out of this repression. I think like this suffocating repression that exists certainly in Clive's life, and kind of seeing these explosions of violence is sort of a way of like feeling something. I guess for him, it's the only way he can.
I think it's kind of a Doctor Who-y sci-fi, and I like this because I think it merits this way to approach phones, and I guess the constant video scroll that phones facilitate as this kind of novel horror. Russell's characterized it as, the moment we all went online is where all this hostility began. He says, "We all love it so much that we don't question it. It's a brand new form of communication in the history of the human race. This has never happened before. They say when the printing press was invented, there were then 200 years of war, and the printing press was a lot slower. Believe you me, Bibles did not reach those villages as fast as the internet does. We're all connected to each other all of the time, and we're not evolved to communicate like that. It is absolutely wrong in every shape and form. I know for a fact that communicating what you think in the form of writing is very, very difficult. Now that we're all typing, we're all led on as though it's easy, and it's not. People are expressing their thoughts when they're not always their thoughts. They haven't worked out how to say things properly, so they say things simply, and they say things brutally. And then because that's said so often, they do end up thinking that. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're absolutely trapped in that loop. It's utterly the wrong way to communicate. And now we sit here wondering why children's mental health is so bad. It's completely fucking obvious. I think it's quite interesting. What do we think of that?
I think there's a degree to which, I mean, I largely agree. I'm very skeptical about the internet, but I think RTD's really missing the financial component. And, you know, he talks elsewhere about the algorithms that mediate online communication as a problem, which aren't the whole of the problem. Certainly there are like specific quirks to instant text-based international conversation that cause problems in and of themselves. But that idea that the internet is inherently dangerous in this extreme way, that everything about the internet as a tool for horror at the moment comes out of the basic premise of the internet, is missing the fact that algorithms are designed for profit at the expense of human life, right? At the expense of political stability. Massive corporations that are so young that they only understand quarterly profit have actively decided to wreck democratic institutions and children's mental health and the safety of marginalized people. They've decided to do those things because it makes them more money in the short term, because it happens to work, that the things that generate the most attention on the internet are those that are frightening and dangerous and radical. And fear is sex. Violence is sex. And I think not accounting for that, the motivating factor of for-profit algorithm design, it means you're not actually able to fix the problem, because we can't keep kids off the internet. It's not going to be possible. It's not a thing. Well, I don't know. You're Australian. Maybe it's worked, but
no, it didn't.
No, it didn't. Well, there we go. I don't think we're going to be able to keep children off the internet, and even if we could, it fucks over everyone, so that wouldn't be enough. We'd need to keep everyone off the internet. That's obviously not possible. And so, of course, you get stuck in that doom spiral of, oh, well, there's nothing we can do, we're all fucked. But actually, there is a lot we can do to tackle the for-profit algorithm design. And it's not easy, but there is, if you correctly identify the root problem, capitalism, then there's a lot you can do to address the problem, but you need to actually make that connection.
Yeah, I think to sort of like reframe what you said there, I think like if you were to have different power relations and economic relations behind these, I guess, social media structures, I think the shape of them and format of them would be different, and how we relate to them would be different. You know, the entire build-up of these things has been informed by this power structure. And I think I take slight issue with RTD's assertion that everyone started going insane when social media and smartphones were introduced. Because I think, like, even if you look back to, say, like the post-9/11 era, and you look how people were behaving, or you look back to, I think there are lots of eras and lots of periods in even like recent history, like 20th century, where you can see people going kind of insane and behaving kind of crazy ways. It maybe wasn't as accelerated as it is now, but I think it is equally a product of these unstable and sort of distorted power relations and people in control of certain forms of media that are still kind of ultimately playing out the same way now as they were in previous forms of media. I think it is that it's the source of the insanity. I don't think it's quite as simple as just communication and instant communication being inherently a bad problem that our brains can't adapt to. I don't think it can be quite simple. I think if the human brain is good at one thing, it is actually adapting to things. I think the trouble is that we have these this antagonistic sort of relationship with other internet users, and I don't think things like that. I don't think it's inherent to internet. Like you say, I think it is a consequence of like the capitalistic structure behind it, and like the the ways that these things have been designed to work for profit. I think ultimately a lot of the social media the problematizing of social media is stuff that you can also apply to other forms of media, even the print media, television. I think a lot of the insane making qualities are shared between those things, just like more diffused in the social media form.
I really am fascinated by the cognitive thing he's talking about, where the speed with which you can intake communication and communicate your quote unquote thoughts online kind of actually impedes you forming your thoughts properly because it's like too fast. That is not a complaint there's all sorts of complaints you hear about social media, but I don't hear that one so often, that it's like cognitively you're skipping steps and it's not like letting you actually form an opinion, I guess the supposed normal way first. What do we think of that, like specifically? Like is it like your emotional reactions are too quick to like when you're doom scrolling or whatever, and therefore you're not really forming an opinion just because it's hitting your emotional core first, in which case I feel like TV could do a similar thing to that, but the short form and the rapid shifting of content online and through social media, I guess, is the mental short circuiting there. Or do you think he means something else than what I'm talking about?
If I may jump in before, I know Oliver will have something interesting to say here. I just want to say here, with this thing about specifically, I guess, that short form and people not putting thoughts into what they say in the manner that they might were they writing an email, say, or a letter or something like that. I think I agree. I think there's like he's onto something there, but I think because I've seen so many people kind of get addicted to posting. I think people just like turn posting in for its own sake into like an obsession. Like it is because of this feedback loop almost, where the act of posting like a tweet or whatever, like as soon as you can, or like a shitty try-hard letterboxd review that's a one-line joke, is not very funny. Like this format of people's need to kind of just put these nuggets of crap out. That again, I don't think that is inherent to online communication. I think that is inherent to, again, how these social media formats have been built up, but they want to reward the act of posting even when you shouldn't be, really. Like, they're set up to kind of give you like that lizard brain, sort of rat brain kind of like, oh yes, this is rewarding, I'm making a post, I'm putting something out there, I'm created something here. And that again sort of discourages you from putting lots of thought and effort and care into your words. I think it is like a format problem, not necessarily like a cognitive. I don't think it's the case that the human brain cannot handle like lots of information. I think it can, but I think we've got these dark patterns with social media that kind of teach us to engage in a harmful way.
Yeah, I'd very much agree. The thing I think is most fascinating about the internet is it's very much like a spiritual dimension above ours, but in which the rules of physics themselves were written by people for reasons, rather than, being pooped out by a giant snail, which is where I believe the real universe came from. But I think what's important to bear in mind with stuff like Twitter is that Twitter caught on because it was well designed to trigger these impulses, but it was designed to, right? Like, you've got all these quirks of human psychology, but corporations had to choose to exploit them and make all these choices in the act of exploiting them, about how exactly, how they were willing to push the human experience of information and twist it and control it, both for the sake of greater profit and for the sake of greater, like, chemical feedback to the user, which itself obviously generates more profit. And I do think there's something to it that the short form is itself dangerous. I think you can see it with video even more than text, the way that things are clipped and trimmed and cropped, and you don't have time to process one video before the next video starts. But I don't think that's exclusive to the internet. I think you see that on for-profit news constantly, like sensationalized news. This thing, you know, a Girl Scout sells her legs on the black market to raise money for her mum's cancer treatment, and a zoo has burnt down, and we're going to war, and the government's corrupt, and more at 9. That sort of pace of information, which itself was designed by news corporations to keep people watching, to keep people viewing, and the exaggeration of that, I think the internet has made it worse for sure, but it's a product of profit seeking.
Yeah, my dad puts on Classic FM in his car radio a lot, and every so often they'll have like a news segment that's really short, and it just does exactly what you just described. It just has out of context headlines of totally random things, just rapid fire one after another, just to give you the impression that the world is on fire. And it's like, okay, now back to some gentle, soothing orchestral tunes, you know, back to some like Tchaikovsky or whatever. You know, it's like whenever I hear that, I'm saying, what the fuck am I listening to? Like, it's so it's so useless. Like, you cannot learn anything about the world in this format, but it's just to create the fake idea that you are somehow keeping up with events and monitoring the situation, even though you are not in any way that matters.
I was going to say, to crash this, just to tie off this bit of the conversation and to crash it back into tiptoe, I think you can see a lot of that structure of news story, this thing, in how tiptoe is written, where it will just crash from one thing to another thing, and the stakes are so high in all these different directions. And the way you pivot just at 100 miles an hour from Leo not going through with a hookup. He has this really emotionally complicated thing, and then he insults his neighbor, then he doesn't go through with this hookup, and then he gets a text from his neighbor's son, and it just moves so fast, and so many of these scenes are like big political things or tied into big political things that it sort of emulates the feeling of vertical scrolling, while obviously being designed and substantive and complex in a way that vertical scrolling isn't.
Yeah, I guess since part of the theme is the idea that history is rushing on mercilessly and the world is sort of rapidly changing around you faster than you can keep up with, I think maybe the pace of the show is also trying to kind of inform that in a way. I mean, that's related to doom scrolling, isn't it? Like that feeling of that vertigo you get of seeing like events happen faster and faster and faster. That both comes from the nature of, you know, scrolling things on social media or in the news, but also from real life, because things are sort of changing in incredibly fast ways in some weeks, you know, weeks where decades happen, as George Galloway once put it. So like, I think like the format of the show is trying to be informed by both of those things, but also mainly to communicate this feeling of like history moving faster than you can keep up with it.
Well, can the answer lay in the past? Because some interviewers put to RTD, like, can TV help? Can TV fix things? I guess you could kind of construe this as phones are the new generation. Can the older generate? Phones are like George and TV is like Leo. Can the older generation or the older medium fix things? He's been asked, like in some articles, can television change the world? Can television have a real positive impact on the world? Because it's a sin. Saw an increase in HIV testing rates. Mr. Bates versus the Post Office did something, brought the nation's attention to the IT scandal, is what this article says. Is that really fixing things, though? Bringing attention to something? I feel like that's... Like HIV testing rates are a material thing.
Certainly with dramas like that, there's a certain element of like, you get the drama once it's all been like done and dusted and sort of resolved, and you can make a drama about it because no one's going to do anything anymore. I don't know. Yeah.
Anyway, Russell's response is to shake his head to the interviewer's question there. And he says, I wish television could change the world. I'd have written more. and changed it faster if I could. But, he's implying he can't. But he says, I do feel bound to comment on the world, though. And then in another one, he says, I've done an awful lot to try and stop these terrible things happening, and it just gets worse. Queer as Folk went out in 99. Age of consent was 18. Section 28 in place. No gay marriage, no gay adoption. All those things came within 26 years. Those are extraordinary leaps, but they're the very things that are now being weaponized against us. All this time, I thought visibility was the answer or the cure, to the extent that I dragged my gayness into every interview I've ever done. You could literally be asking about the weather, and I'll say, yes, I'm gay, and it's sunny, because I genuinely believe in visibility. Think about someone sitting at home, trapped in a closet, trapped in a lonely house, trapped in a lonely town, where they've never heard anyone say that before. I'll be the person to say it, and I still believe in that, but now I also have to reckon with what happens then. I never thought ahead. It's as if I were imagining some sort of future nirvana which no society ever has. We're always at war with something, and here we're at war with ourselves. So yes, you can point to things that are demonstrably better, yet now they're being weaponized to make it worse. What happens when we've got visibility, we've got equality, we've got representation, they see us, and they still don't like us? So he's pretty down. Whenever an interviewer tries to, imply, can TB help? Or can all this visibility help? It's either no, or I used to think so, and now I don't really think so. So,
that thing of they see us and they still don't like us, that is very sort of baked into the show. I think there's it's pretty explicitly brought up, and Melba sort of goes on about how I think they've always hated us. But my question is I'm kind of wondering about that and that idea, this idea that there's a they and that they have always hated us, and now that they still don't like us and they've seen us, and I don't know. I feel like something is being glossed over here, which is the idea of people's attitudes sort of morphing and changing and being deliberately manipulated. Because I'm not sure if a wave resurgent homophobia or something like that is necessarily just a consistent thing. Is that not a product of gay people being used as a scapegoat, created as a scapegoat, constructed through have narratives and information? Is that not a manipulation that's happening, a transformation that's occurring? I'm not sure if it's this strict battle lines drawn of they have always been against us, they have always wanted to destroy us, they are who, I'm not even sure who they is in this case. Is it just all straight people? Or is it meant to be alluding to a higher sort of elite kind of sort of guiding sort of the society? I'm not entirely sure. It feels like a bit reductive of a narrative to go with, this idea that there's just a fundamental incompatibility, rather than that there is a constantly morphing sort of set of attitudes and things can actually shift.
I think yeah, what Melba says there is emotionally true more than it's actually. I think they is the people who aren't Melba, right? They're the world around her. When she says, they tricked us, didn't they? They got us all out in the open so they could shoot us. That's no specific person, right? And Melba's not, accusing a person like Clive of having schemed to have done this. What she's saying is the way things have shaken out. The world at large let us do this and changed its mind on the idea that we had an equal existence to them. But I think to me that rings really true. Gay marriage is the first political thing I was involved in, the first time I was thinking about politics and doing things politically in a serious way, and it did feel to me oh, the world has changed. I'm growing up in a better world than people who've come before me. And it does feel like a trap. It does feel like a trick. Yeah, I don't know, it resonated with me.
I also feel in terms of the backlash and kind of the I guess the fascistic attitudes, the sort of the very repressive attitudes that are sort of getting mainstreamed and sort of forced through, kind of shoved through, housed into power through all these institutions. I feel like there is a minoritarian aspect of this, like to that ultimately is like is not the majority of society that is actually doing this. It is just like a cross section that is powerful enough, or has been given enough power to sort of change like the outcome for everybody else. Maybe that's too naive of a view, but like I do feel I'm wary of ever treating it like the world is like a thing that has like an attitude to you. It always seems like I'm always thinking of things in terms of, I guess, power struggles. I guess just because it always seems to me like there's a reason if we're getting scapegoated for one thing or another through like media narratives, and that's being pushed very hard. And, billionaires and such are kind of hitching their wagon to that. They have a project for society and civilization that they want to kind of push through, which they can do because they're incredibly powerful. And all the groups that they're kind of shoving under the bus are kind of means to an end. So, I'm always just like, I struggle to see it as like necessarily a matter of humanity as a whole changing, but rather, because I mean, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I feel like the visibility that RTD talks about does have an impact in terms of like the majority of people, like the widest population. But it is all you need to actually reverse all the gains and make stuff suck is to get a strong enough sort of minority faction to sort of to get into power and sort of like start inflicting elite rule on a large number of people.
And I do think it's notable in that way that what the show's building towards is a single act of violence. You don't need a years and years style complete fascist takeover of the government. You need one man. And we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But at least the implication at this point is you need one man. And he can destroy a life.
Yeah, I feel like there's going to be maybe an element of mob violence or something like that. The format of a lynching seems like there's going to be like a group of thugs or whatever, like going after Leo for some reason, and Clive will have facilitated that somehow. But yeah, it is actually very distinct from a lot of other times RTD has done this kind of thing, because we're not doing the full civilizational collapse. We're not doing the full descent into fascism. It's not Turn Left. It's not Miracle Day. It's not Years and Years. This is actually a small scale. That's actually quite refreshing. No, I think about it that way. Because RTD's done that. What he's been hitting that one drum so often.
This is the true Midnight sequel.
Oh yeah.
I feel like, the show was about the porousness between Clive and Leo's households and, the blending that's going on between them. I feel like there's also this social media talk. There's this porousness with the videos Clive is watching. The gore videos aren't taking place in England, presumably. Some of them look like combat footage or, footage from certain other types of countries. I feel like there's almost like this imperial boomerang type thing here, where it's like the rhetoric is becoming so violent through all this division that Russell was talking about, and for it to spool out into like actually getting physicalized into like a lynching of Leo is like the porousness between the online world and the physical world is, it's like slipped through between those. I find that a really interesting thing for all that he's talking about, the algorithms and people getting lost online. It's that they're two real people and they're physically very close to each other. I think that's a real horror element to me, that it's like coming out of the screens, this kind of violence. Clive has immersed himself in this violence in like a disassociated way because it's taking place, far away, and to bring it home, I think that's the, it's terrible that it's happening anywhere, but I find that kind of interesting aspect of it.
That mention of an imperial boomerang is so interesting, because it's like maybe the least touched on aspect, but like essentially part of having this super interconnected world through social media is that if the outside world is filled with violence and cruelty through all kinds of meddling that I guess ruling classes of various kinds have done in it, then I guess social media is a vector for that to flood back into the metropole in a sense, even if it's not in like the direct sense of like violence physically happening necessarily. We are seeing that and being exposed to it in a new way, in ways that we haven't before. So again, like you say, that is feeding in. So I've no doubt some of the violence that Clive is watching will be connected to conflicts that maybe the British government had a hand in at some point, you know?
Yeah.
So like the political dimensions of it, it's not, nothing exists in a vacuum, basically. You could find the connections to on every level to all of this. Like it's all one big thing. And like you say, it's porous, like the divisions aren't solid.
And even before the sort of re-importing of physical violence, you see the same kind of rhetorical chains of logic connecting imperial violence to neighbourly violence in the UK in an imperial core country. The idea that someone like Clive spends a lot of mental energy justifying violence against people a very long way away, and he's put a lot of thought into how violence against some people is good, actually, and necessary, actually. And so, of course, those same pathways, those same thoughts, that same logic is gonna come back and kill someone. That's how it goes. I mean, you see it all the time with Palestine, particularly, where, for political reasons, the British government take a position that actually genocide is fine, and once you've taken that political position, anything is permissible to uphold that position because you've already decided genocide's fine. So therefore, there's no limit on how you can actually police that opinion in Britain, which is why we see no limit on the policing Palestine protests. Yeah.
Once you've sort of solidified like a hierarchy of humanity, like some lives are worth less than others for whatever reason, then everything else kind of spools out from that, and you're pretty much on a beeline to like as dark as it gets. A lot of the stuff, I also, when it comes to like Palestine and stuff like that, a lot of it is kind of hooked into this idea that you were defending the West from like this Islamist kind of invasion, like this sort of like it's a counter-terror issue. That's kind of the pretext that's been used a lot. I guess to try and link it back to Tiptoe, I think a lot of the sort of xenophobic kind of paranoid stuff links back to it's like a larger sort of macro scale version of what on the smaller level is this idea of like the family unit as like an island that you have to protect, like a fortress. So that's kind of what you've got. You can see it sort of with Clive kind of defending his like closed off family unit. Like it's that same mentality, this idea of like being besieged by the outside world. So that happens on both a national level, on the familial level, on a cultural level. Like it's the same thing.
Yeah, no coincidence that the racist protect the kids from your brown neighbours is the same thing as the homophobic protect your kids from your gay neighbours. All very connected, all the same pathways, all the same thoughts. And you get this sense throughout these first two episodes of that hierarchy of personhood you mentioned bubbling up. You know, Maggie says fostering's the next best thing to biologically having a child, and then quickly corrects herself. But she thinks that gay relationships aren't as good. She does, and you know, she's probably, I imagine, not an explicitly homophobic person in her life, but she does. She thinks gay people aren't worth as much, and gay families aren't the same thing. They're not as valuable as straight families, and people who, all the way through the show, people are saying things to that effect, right?
Yeah, that is to use that example of Maggie. There's like this, like there's a reproductive aspect to it, and this idea that fostering a child that has been born from someone else is not as like valid or legitimate as creating that child, you know, with your own blood, you know, your own cells, you know, your own body, and it just seems to come back to this idea of this ideal almost of like the the ideal reproduction of continuing your own lineage, creating like something that is somehow a replica of yourself, rather than taking on somebody else's like genes, somebody else's information, somebody else's burden. And that is also kind of related, I think, to what you were mentioning earlier about the parallel between paranoia about like your brown neighbours and paranoia about your gay neighbours. Like both of those things have this kind of element where it turns into this sort of sexual psychosis. Like the idea of, you have both the idea of gayness corrupting your child, and then you also have the idea that the savage people of colour will basically a fear of miscegenation, which is framed as a fear of sexual assault. You know, this idea that kind of the savages are they're coming for your daughters, you know, they're lusty and stuff like that. It all feeds into these anxieties about reproduction specifically, and the idea that you will fail to successfully sort of reproduce like your own image or your own class, your own family. The idea that will get interrupted either through your kid being trans, your kid being gay, or your kid, I don't know, like producing like non-white offspring, or like just all kinds of things, like your kid's purity being ruined somehow. Like there's all kinds of psychosis around there, but it all seems to come back to this idea of like creating or reproducing the next generation.
Yeah, very much the idea of trying to keep the walls between your houses heavy and thick, trying to keep your unit, your family pure, but the walls aren't that thick.
There was an interesting geopolitical thing about how the show got made. I think partially, we mentioned earlier, like various political figures get mentioned directly, and not in kind of like twee ways. Like Melba directly blames Trump, you know, in that fantastic dialogue in episode 1. I mean, you know, the whole wasteland of Doctor Who is partially because there's not enough money in Britain to make it anymore. So I thought this thing Russell said was interesting about Tiptoe, which was, he says, the radicalization we're having is every bit as much an American story as the UK. Radicalization is happening worldwide. It's happening with every minority group to a vast extent. It's speeding up. This is for an interview with Deadline. And so Deadline themselves then say, several days after Deadline interviewed Davis, was 26th of May, 26, this article came out. The UK government brought in a law requiring single-sex spaces such as changing rooms and toilets be used on the basis of biological sex, which the head of the trans rights campaign group Transactual said will fail to protect the rights and dignity of transgender people, but appears to have weakened protections for the LGBT community as a whole. A lot of trans friends are right at the sharp end of the argument, added RTD. When Davis revealed an American sale of the finished tape is close, he said it is his first show in recent memory that has been fully funded in the UK, partially because, Russell quote, we knew it would be hard to raise American money for this with its clear condemnation of Trump, and so therefore it's funded by Channel 4 alongside deficit financing from distributor ITV Studios. So I thought that was interesting that they felt the need to completely finance it within Britain out of thinking it would be too difficult to get American money for something being open about its politics in such a way.
Yeah, that feels like a Trump 2 thing to me. Like, it seems like there's been a lot of real enclosure with everyone in the US kind of sucking up to Trump as much as they can. Like the concept of being, join the resistance, that has sort of folded, and then everyone is like, we just want to suck up to the president and be as nice to the president as we can, and sort of tickle the president's nuts as much as we can, and not allow any criticism. It does feel like that's sort of the utter elite capture of sort of media. It has kind of been much more severe in this. I could be off base here, but that's what it feels like to me in the second era versus the first one.
The line from Melba, what if Trump just keeps winning and winning and winning, has really stuck with me. Because he'll be dead in a year, right? He'll be dead in a couple of years. He's a very old, very sick man. And then he's going to keep winning afterwards, right? This sense, and all the way through the show, she's talking in sort of higher terms than everyone else. She's speaking metaphorically and spiritually. But yeah, there is this sense, I mean, this is obvious, but there is this sense that America's picked its path, and not, you know, it wasn't a particularly democratic decision, but the institutions in America have decided that they're a fascist country now, and they might just keep deciding that.
That line does resonate for that reason. I did feel it was slightly undermined elsewhere in the show when Stephanie brings up the idea that Trump is actually like trying to rewrite the constitution so he can like literally win a third term. That made me think, is RTD just talking literally there? Like, is he actually talking about Trump just like winning every election? And if only we could get the Democrats to win again, then that would fix everything. It's a bit mean, but I do wonder sometimes with some of these writers, like, are they just being super centrist in their thinking? But like, if you taken by itself, that line about Trump like winning does have that kind of transcendent quality. The idea that he could figuratively win, even if it's not literally him.
Yeah, years and years has him running a third term, right? With, like, technically Mike Pence is the president, I think.
In Years and Years, did he win the election that Biden won in real life? Or was it... Yeah, I can't remember what happened there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he won 2020, and then Mike Pence wins in 2024, and then uses his, like, ugh. Which is pretty good.
I'm going to give it a relevant Doctor Who connection. So, 3 years ago, you guys might have seen it. The BBC Imagine documentary series did an episode profiling RTD's career and his return with RTD2 for Doctor Who. But then, a fan who recognised his house as, filmed on the program, turned up outside, and Russell started receiving letters from viewers. When a kind neighbour who had a key once let themselves into Russell's property without knocking at the front door first, it gave Russell a fright. Russell says, I was fascinated by how startling that was, how porous your house feels. He then started contemplating what it's like for other people. If it's reaching me, what the fuck is it like on levels where you have less defense and less ability to move and less money, frankly? So it's all thanks to a piece glazing Russell for RTD2 that his house got identified and that the porousness started to begin. The weird thing is elsewhere, I can't quite work out is what happened here, because in some other interviews he says the story started simply with me giving my neighbor my front door key. I'm away a lot, parcels get delivered, you give your neighbor a key. Now my neighbor is lovely, but as a storyteller you start thinking what's going to happen. But then elsewhere he said things happen both at work and at home in ways that I'm not going to go into because it will only encourage them to happen again. Genuinely, that made me think that's enough. If this anger, this violence, and these lies are getting close to my life, I'm in a very privileged, lucky, and well-off position. So for those who are not so well off, this must be really bad. The times must be getting worse and worse and worse. I'm kind of unclear on, wait, what happens? Did he give his neighbor a key and they let themselves in and that was fine? Or thanks to the Doctor Who BBC Imagine, piece talking up RTD, did a fan turn outside and try to get in? I'm not quite clear, and I guess he doesn't want it to be clear what happened there, but Doctor Who's to blame either way.
I think there's a few parallel things happening. So you've got the fans kind of finding out where he lives and sending him fan mail, which makes him kind of paranoid. Then you've got his friendly neighbour turning up unannounced one time, which gave him a fright, which he frightened him because he was already feeling kind of paranoid about people knowing where he lives, and he was thinking, oh god, is that someone else? Is that some complete stranger? Then he saw who it actually was, and it was like, fine. But again, that had him thinking about other potential outcomes that could have been. And then maybe I think you have a third thing that he doesn't want to talk about, which is, I would assume, some other form of harassment, maybe some disturbed individuals has maybe tried to send him hate mail or something, or try to go after him in some personal capacity because of what they think he is or something about who they think he is. There's all sorts of stuff. I think that you've got people. I'm sure there's people accusing RCD of being a groomer or whatever, who maybe they've sent him some shit like that, because he talks about him getting close to his personal life. So, and it's you've got all these themes playing into Tiptoe, the show. So I think it doesn't need to be one connected thing. I think it's several separate things can happen at roughly the same time that all kind of feed the way he's thinking about these things.
I've only got one note left. I don't know about you two. My note is, I absolutely love the title card. Tiptoe in massive, heavy lettering, slightly inset, like it's 3D. Like a scream. Tiptoe! I like that a lot.
Yeah, like when they announced the title of the show, I was kind of like curious because it sounded almost like playful, like "ooh, tiptoe," but like in context, it's actually incredibly serious. And when they kind of reveal what it means when Melba gives that speech, kind of tells you what the title of the show means. It sort of it hits like a truck. Like it's really, really important. Like it's much darker than it seems.
You don't know what drag is. It's a howl, right? It's not Margaret bloody Thatcher. That same idea that the quiet is loud, the loud is quiet.
Like Oliver said earlier, I love the 4-act structure. So with the ad breaks, when the title card comes up, it's just cool. It's a better structure for TV, isn't it? Having ad breaks in some ways. I really like the kind of really split up, kind of theatrical act structure. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not always of the opinion that the acts have to be like at equal lengths or whatever, but stuff being divided out like that way is always fun. Like I love when Twin Peaks: The Return kind of does that. I love when The Curse kind of does that. You've got like one movement, then you've got another movement within an individual episode. I think stuff like that is always fun. It's nice for structure to be front and center.
It feels quite Doctor Who serial as well.
Yeah. It's a 4-parter each episode. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And yeah, like I said before, it's a nice thing because it means you don't have to have a whole episode commit to a big concept. You can take out one act of your episode and commit that to a big concept. So the first act of the first episode, we're just following the evolution of the story that Leo tells. And then the big punch at the end of the thing is him lying, him exaggerating it at work and telling the false version. That sort of unity gives you a nice thing. It makes it really clear that it's important for us to understand this is a character who lies. Our first act introducing him shows how much of a lie he is. And then throughout the rest of the series, you've got similar one-act commitments to a bit.
My only small just observations, kind of thoughts about George. I was kind of surprised that like a closeted 16-year-old is showing his entire face on Grindr in his own neighborhood. Like, isn't he scared of getting recognized? Like, I know I was like when I first went on like apps like that. So it's like, well, I'm just a bit surprised like that. Like, isn't he aware of himself? Like, there are full-grown adults who will put a filter over their face. I don't know. I mean, that might just be like because he's a kid and he's dumb. It could be nothing. Also, separately, this is just a stupid thing, but when he's eating that pie in the cold open in episode 2, my first thought was, close enough, welcome back, Gwen Cooper. Just put me in mind of that scene in Combat when she's eating the pizza, forlornly eating the pizza. It's just my first thought.
Great.
Oh, don't we love Torchwood?
Yes.
Also, one last thing. My favourite gag is 662 metres. Not that far. That was funny. I laughed at that. Yeah. Very, very drawn from real life, I think.
All right. How do we think the show's going to end next week? I wonder.
Leo dies.
I wonder if we will get epilogue, like if we'll see the aftermath of his dying, or will that literally just be the end? I'm very curious about that. Like, will we get any downtime following up on the lynching, or will we not see any of that? Like, I kind of want to see like what happens next, but I'm aware it might be a more resounding ending if you just cut dead.
So presumably each episode's going to start with a flash forward to someone else's perspective, like looking out of a window, or
you'd assume so, yeah,
or some such. Which gives us, you can do Z next episode, and then maybe Clive's wife, whatever her name is.
Maybe Bridget the nosy neighbour can get one. I don't know if there's enough episodes for that, actually.
Bridget!
Do we have theories about what FLO on George's back might mean? Like, why is that written there?
My guess was that Z picks the name Flo at some point, and then they party together or something, as part of the build-up.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting, yeah. This makes sense. There's also the t-shirt, 20 cents, like the football shirt that Clive is wearing. I think in the trailers you can see some other people wearing it as well. I'm wondering, like, what is that gonna entail? Because, like, with Years and Years, you have RT sort of making up these, like, fictitious sort of fascist movements, like the 4-Star Party or whatever. Like, I don't know, like, is there going to be... I'm just curious about what's going on there. It's just pure speculation.
Yeah, so I don't know.
That wraps up our discussion of the first 2 Tiptoe episodes. 3 more to go. Let us know what you thought of these 2 opening episodes of the show and what you thought of anything we had to say or any stuff we didn't say about the 2 episodes. Yeah, always great to get a new RTD show, so let us know what you think. Cheers.